The narrow corridors of the House of the Undying twisted around Daenerys Targaryen like the coils of some enormous serpent. The air was cold and stagnant, scented with dust and old, buried magic. Every footfall echoed eerily off unseen walls, and her hand shook slightly as she held a flickering torch aloft. She could still sense, in the hollow of her mind, the presence of the Warlocks who had lured her here with promises of insight and prophecy. Their voices had been rasping whispers that spoke of power, hidden truths, and a destiny so grand it could reshape kingdoms. Her dragons, still small and vulnerable, had ventured alongside her, clinging to her shoulders and following at her feet, scales glittering against the gloom. Drogon hissed softly, wings fluttering as if in protest. Rhaegal and Viserion paced close behind, their bright eyes scanning the corridor with an unblinking vigilance. Daenerys could not help but feel a swell of protective instinct for them, for they were her children. Yet a tremor, subtle and persistent, ran through her body. She sensed a trap, or perhaps a test she had not fully understood when she stepped across the house's threshold. Back in Qarth, most claimed that this building was older than the city itself, a ruin left over from the earliest empire that had once thrived beyond memory. Here, illusions came to life, beckoning with sweet promises and illusions that threatened to ensnare the unprepared. Even so, Daenerys had come, driven by a thirst for knowledge that might help her reclaim the Iron Throne. She walked onward, deeper, her breath shallow in her chest. The Warlocks' voices slithered in her ears like serpents. "Mother of dragons," they whispered, "come see, come and be enlightened." Her torch sputtered, and she paused at a fork in the corridor. It was impossible to distinguish which path led deeper, or whether any path led out. Each hallway was identical, lined with dark wooden doors and faded panels of ancient silk tapestries, depicting half-forgotten victories of unknown kings. She turned right on instinct, heart pounding, for there was no clue to guide her. Drogon hissed again, a plaintive sound like the beginning of a growl. "It is all right," Daenerys murmured to him. "We will not be parted long. We will see what these Warlocks mean to show us, and then we will leave." Her voice, though laced with determination, betrayed a tremor. She had told herself before that she was strong. She had survived the Red Waste. She had survived Piet Pre's sly threats and the treachery lurking beneath Qarth's opulence. Yet here, in these dark corridors, her nerves were laid bare. In truth, she missed the loyal presence of Ser Jorah Mormont. She had ordered him to remain behind when the Warlocks had instructed her to come alone. She had hoped to avoid confrontation, or the Warlock's suspicion that she might bring an armed guard. But doubt nibbled at her. Perhaps she should have insisted that Jorah accompany her. If only she could sense him near, a stalwart shadow at her side. His brand of devotion was steadfast, and that loyalty had saved her more than once. Now she could not help but think of how she had left him, patrolling outside with only a handful of her household guard. Winds shifted through the corridor, though no door or window was visible. The torch flickered and dimmed. A hush descended that felt like tangible dread. Then, without warning, figures emerged at the far end of the corridor. Tall, too thin, draped in ragged cloaks that made them appear half-phantom. Warlocks, their eyes were sunken, and their skin almost translucent in the dimness, a weird bluish tinge. She knew their kind, servants of Piet Pre, though whether these particular Warlocks were illusions or flesh and blood, she could not say. She lifted her chin. "What do you want?" she called. Their voices came in a soft, discordant whisper that merged into one. "We want you, Mother of Dragons, and the power that sleeps within your children. You have come to us freely. There is no reason to be afraid." She felt Drogon's talons dig sharply into her shoulder. "I am not afraid," she said, though the flutter in her stomach betrayed her. "If you wish to show me a vision or speak to me of the future, do so openly. I tire of your shadows." A faint chuckle emanated from the Warlocks. The corridor seemed to stretch, walls elongating, the door behind her vanishing into blackness. Daenerys glanced back, heart jolting, but there was nowhere else to turn. The 3 warlocks, or however many they truly were, for they seemed to blur and fuse, came forward with that eerie grace. As they drew closer, a shimmer of dark light flickered at their fingertips, as though they held candle flames the color of midnight. Her dragons hissed and shrank back. "Let us guide you," they murmured. "Let us help you see what must be seen." Daenerys wanted to speak, to protest, but her limbs seemed leaden. It was as if those shimmering shadows at their fingertips reached out and pressed against her mind, a weight that grew with every heartbeat. Her vision began to swim. She blinked hard, fighting a sudden dizziness. The corridor around her twisted, the walls undulating as though made of water. She heard a door slam behind her, or perhaps before her. She tried to lift her hand, to brandish the torch, but it was snuffed out, leaving only pale, unnatural light cast by the warlocks. Her dragons yowled and hissed. She sensed them scurrying around her ankles, their wings fluttering, but she could no longer see clearly. She forced her throat to work, rasping, "You cannot have my dragons. You cannot keep me here." But the warlock's power seeped into her consciousness, drawing her mind into a swirling labyrinth of illusions. Voices, half-formed images, the stench of incense. None of it felt real, yet all of it threatened to ensnare her. She glimpsed brief flashes of a red door, a memory from her childhood in Bravos. She heard Viserys' voice, though twisted with an anger reminiscent of his final days. She heard the clash of steel and saw a great throne of swords, melted in parts and half-shrouded in shadow. Then the illusions crumbled abruptly. Another flicker of torchlight illuminated the corridor, revealing that the warlocks were suddenly reeling backward, clutching their chests. Daenerys blinked, struggling to reorient herself. She heard a roar, a very human roar, and the flash of steel. Ser Jorah Mormont burst from the darkness, sword in hand, his teeth bared in a snarl. Behind him, 2 of her household guards advanced. One carried a torch and the other had a crossbow, already loaded, aimed at the nearest warlock. "Khaleesi!" Jorah shouted, using the old title by which he had first served her. "I told you, you should not walk into their trap alone." His voice was tinged with relief, but his gaze was sharp, scanning for danger. The warlocks, caught off guard, screeched and skittered backward down the corridor. Daenerys swayed, nearly dropping to her knees as she fought to collect her senses. Jorah's arm encircled her waist, steadying her. She felt the scratch of his mail against her side, and a surge of gratitude flooded her chest, a fierce warmth in this place of dread and cold illusions. "You must go," hissed one of the warlocks in a reedy voice. "Now that your knight has meddled, the illusions will not serve you. They will serve us." Before Daenerys could reply, the corridor shifted again, the shape of the walls contorting. The warlocks vanished into air, or else melted into the gloom. All around them, the hush of the hall gave way to eerie chanting and the echo of inhuman steps. Jorah kept his sword raised, pressing Daenerys behind him. "This way," he muttered. The household guard with the torch led on, and Daenerys followed as best she could, the dragons scuttling along with them. She wanted to protest that they should pursue the warlocks, confront them, but she also realized she was still reeling from the illusions that had assailed her. Even Drogon, boldest of her children, seemed reluctant to remain in that corridor. They turned a corner, only to find themselves at a tall, heavy door of black wood. Jorah kicked it open. A wave of rancid air rushed out, as though from a tomb. They entered a wide chamber. At the center was a dais upon which stood a circular table riddled with cryptic runes, half-eaten by the passage of time. There were no windows, only the flicker of torches set in sconces around the curved walls. Daenerys caught her breath. She could feel the swirling eddies of power in the air, something that made her skin crawl. She laid a hand on Drogon's head, stroking his warm scales. Jorah moved to her side, close but not touching. His posture was both protective and cautious. "If we remain here," he said, voice low, "we must fight our way back out. I found you only because your guard and I forced an entrance from a balcony above, near the rooftop. This place is more labyrinth than house, Khaleesi." We need to leave before the Warlocks regroup. They hunger for your dragon's power." She nodded, but something in the flicker of the torches made her pause. Beyond that dais, at the edge of the room, a faint glow caught her eye, soft, bluish. An orb? A reflection? She stepped toward it, ignoring Jorah's protest. She realized it was a large glass sphere, perched on a pedestal, inside which swirling smoke churned. A Warlock's device. With each step she took, the swirl in the sphere quickened. She felt a tug in her mind, the faint echo of those illusions from before. She might have been brash, but curiosity still tugged at her. There might be knowledge here, something about her future or her dragon's destinies. But Jorah's grip on her upper arm tightened. "We do not have time," he growled. Reluctantly, she tore her gaze away. "Very well," she whispered. "Show me the path you found." They left the chamber, forging back down the corridor in search of the narrow stair Jorah had used. But illusions barred their path. Doors that were not truly doors, corridors that vanished into blank walls, a stifling sense of movement in the darkness. Warlock's laughter echoed, though whether real or conjured, Daenerys could not tell. Ahead, her guard with the torch stumbled, gasping. He peered into a small antechamber lit by a single guttering brazier. "Sire," he called. "I think we came through here, but the antechamber was swirling in half-darkness, every surface draped with heavy shadows. Then, from the corner of that room, Piet Pri himself emerged. He was slender, cadaverous, his robes glinting in the uncertain light, his eyes fixed on Daenerys. A thin smile creased his pale lips. "You should have come alone, as we asked," he said. "We meant to show you wonders, Mother of Dragons. Now you have chosen violence. If that is your wish, we can oblige." Jorah advanced with his sword raised, but Piet Pri only murmured a phrase. Blue flames flickered in midair, forming slender serpents of glowing energy that coiled about his arms. Jorah stepped back, startled. The other guard raised his crossbow, but Piet Pri's illusions vanished before he could loose a bolt, reappearing behind him with a hiss. Daenerys fought to steady her voice. "You said I must come alone. You did not say you would trap me. My dragons and I will leave. Stand aside." Piet Pri smiled his unnerving smile. "We asked for you and your children so that we might share the house's secrets, not so that you might slip away unchanged. You must remain, and so must they." His eyes flicked to the small forms of Drogon, Regal, and Viserion. The dragons flapped their wings, uncertain, turning anxious circles around her ankles. She felt a sudden wave of protective fury. "You want their power. You would drain the life from them, drain my life too." A shrug. "Such is the way of magic. To gain, one must lose. We only do what is necessary." Jorah lunged, swinging his blade. Piet Pri stepped back, too late to avoid the slash, and Daenerys felt a fierce jolt of triumph as the Warlock's arm was sliced open. He hissed in pain, staggering. The illusions that had begun to form around him flickered out. "Go!" Jorah roared, pointing to a narrow archway beyond the brazier. "It leads upward." They rushed forward. Piet Pri tried to summon another illusion, but blood dripped freely from his wound, and whatever strength he summoned was weakened. Daenerys could sense it, as though the entire structure around them trembled. A swirling wind of unseen power gathered in the corridor. Torches shivered, threatened to blow out. She ducked under the arch and began to climb the narrow stair. Jorah and her guards pressed around her, forming a protective bubble of steel and torchlight. At the top of the stair, they found a small door propped open. Beyond, the starlit sky of Qarth opened wide, and Daenerys' breath escaped in a rush. It was night, the vault of heaven scattered with bright stars. They stepped onto a narrow rooftop walkway. Far below lay the city's winding streets, lit by moonlight and the occasional lantern. The air was a relief, fresh and cool upon her face after the claustrophobic corridors. But something stirred behind them, a flicker of movement. She spun in time to see a warlock emerging from the door, wounded but vengeful, lips curved back in a silent snarl. Jorah lunged. Another flash of steel and the warlock fell. Daenerys heard him tumble down the stair, the echoes growing fainter. She turned, scanning for any sign of Piet Pri. The walkway connected to a second tower by a thin stone arch. "This is how we came," Jorah explained, his breath ragged. "The guards and I scaled the tower from the outside, found an entrance near the rooftop. We can get you back down with ropes. Hurry, Khaleesi, before they gather again." Daenerys nodded, though her chest was still tight with adrenaline. She cradled Drogon in her arms for a moment, feeling his trembling. Then she set him down and hurried across the arch, flanked by her loyal men. In the tower beyond, a single wooden trapdoor yawned open. She slipped through, descending an ancient spiral stair, half crumbling. The darkness pressed close, but the torch from her guard illuminated every twist and turn. Finally, they reached the base of the tower, which opened onto a small courtyard hemmed in by high walls. 2 more of her men waited there, anxiously peering through a heavy wooden gate. As soon as they spotted Daenerys, they exhaled in visible relief. Jorah signaled them to open the gate, and they spilled out into the Qarthine night. She did not look back until she stood a dozen paces clear of the courtyard. When she did, she saw the looming shape of the House of the Undying, tall and twisted, black windows like hollow eyes. No sign of warlocks giving chase, though she could almost feel their sullen fury in the shifting shadows. She held her dragons close, ignoring the deep ache in her muscles. And in that moment, she realized that everything had changed. In the original telling, she had ventured deeper into the House of the Undying, lost in illusions until Drogon unleashed flame that broke their hold. But here, Jorah had come earlier, crashed through the illusions, and stolen her away before she could see the full tapestry of visions and portents that might have guided her. She felt a pang of uncertainty. What had she missed by not enduring the warlock's final illusions? She had craved that knowledge, that possible insight into her fate. Yet here she was, alive, her dragons safe. She heard Jorah's heavy breathing at her side and looked at him. By the faint glow of torchlight, the lines of his face were etched with worry, and something else. Devotion, yes, but also a certain desperation. He had chosen to defy her command, to break into the House of the Undying. She swallowed. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was quiet, but carried a world of gratitude. "You saved me from their illusions. But how did you know to find me?" His expression tightened. "I did not trust Piet Pri. The night you left, I gathered these men and took it upon myself to wait near the walls until we could find a way in. I told myself I would not allow you to be hurt." She studied him, glimpsing the earnestness in his eyes, the sweat along his brow. For a moment, words failed her. A swirl of conflicting emotions brewed in her chest. Gratitude for his protection, anger that the warlocks had tried to ensnare her, curiosity about the illusions never seen. She breathed deeply. "I owe you a great debt," she said softly. "Without you, I might be lost in that darkness. I was a fool." He shook his head, but she pressed on. "I was arrogant to think they would simply reveal the truth to me out of courtesy. I see that now. You have my thanks, Ser Jorah, you and all of you who came." She glanced at the guards, who seemed relieved that she was free and in one piece. "If I may speak, Khaleesi," one of them said, "we should return to Xaro Xhoan Daxos's palace. That was your last place of safety in the city. We can bar the gates and ensure no warlock sets foot within." Daenerys's mouth twisted. She remembered that Xaro Xhoan Daxos had offered her sanctuary. Yes, but at a price. He wanted her hand in marriage, and with it the promise that, should she ever claim the Iron Throne, Qarth's wealth and influence would be exalted. She suspected his generosity was as fragile as spun sugar. But for now, if she stayed on the streets, she would be vulnerable. "Very well," she said at last. "We will go to Xaro's palace. We will rest. And then we will decide if I am to remain in Qarth a day longer, or if we sail at once." So it was that the small party, still trembling from the confrontation, set off through Qarth's twisting streets under the moon's pale gaze. The House of the Undying loomed in the distance, a silent behemoth. Daenerys felt its presence like a weight on her heart, reminding her that she had not faced its ultimate test. She had not glimpsed the visions that might have shaped her future. But she was free and her dragons safe. For that, she was grateful, if uneasy. They reached Xaro's palace in the early hours of the morning, slipping through the grand gates as discreetly as possible. Yet the corridors within were no less opulent than before, lined with polished marble floors and columns inlaid with gold. Xaro had not been expecting them, but he rushed from his private chambers the moment one of his servants gasped out the news that the Mother of Dragons had returned in dire straits. "My dearest Daenerys!" he exclaimed, throwing wide his arms in dramatic flair. "What has happened? You look as though you have been through a war." She forced a polite but tense smile. "Merely another demonstration of the Warlocks' hospitality," she answered, voice tightly controlled. "I was rescued by Ser Jorah Mormont, and for that I am fortunate." Xaro's eyes glittered as he took in the scene. Her guards, dusty and battered, her dragons restless and anxious. "Ah, yes, the Warlocks," he said. "You see, dear Daenerys, I cautioned you that they would try something. They are hungry for any morsel of power. But come, you must be tired. Let me offer you a bath, a meal, anything you desire. It is yours." Daenerys inclined her head. "Thank you. We will rest for what remains of the night. In the morning, we will speak of what must be done." Xaro gestured grandly, and his servants led Daenerys and her entourage to their quarters. Jorah lingered a moment, warily eyeing Xaro, but ultimately he followed her to ensure she was safe. Daenerys did not speak much as the palace servants prepared her rooms. Her thoughts churned, half lost in the swirl of illusions that still haunted her memo. R.Y.P. Pre's voice rang in her ears, whispering that she did not know what she was missing by fleeing. When at last she was alone, with only her dragons for company, she knelt by a gilded couch, exhausted. Drogon climbed up her arm and perched near her shoulder, burying his snout against her neck. She sighed, letting the tension bleed away. They were safe. And yet, safe from what? The Warlocks would not give up so easily. And in the meantime, she still had no clear path for how to reclaim her family's throne. She considered leaving Qarth before dawn, sailing away if she could find a ship. But she had not prepared for such a sudden departure. She had no alliance that might grant her a fleet. And, perhaps, something inside her still yearned for whatever secrets might be gleaned from this city. She slid to the floor, resting her back against the couch. Her thoughts drifted again to Ser Jorah. She recalled the fierce determination in his eyes when he burst from the darkness, the way he had gripped her waist as if she might vanish if he let go. She knew his devotion. She knew, too, of his heartbreak, that look he wore sometimes that suggested he had crossed the seas for her, cast aside any hope of returning honorably to Westeros, all for the sake of her cause. Her eyes slowly closed, and sleep came in fits and starts. Dreams haunted her, half illusions, half memory. Images of the Red Keep's throne room ablaze, of a bloody comet streaking across the sky, of a child with silver gold hair who whispered that she was too late. Always, in the background, she heard Piet Pre's laughter. But each time she stirred, she felt Drogon's warmth or the presence of her other dragons curled at her side, and she clung to that anchor until the nightmares receded again into darkness. When dawn broke, she roused herself, determined to face the day. Word came that Xaro awaited her in one of his many lavish dining halls. Daenerys, dressed in a simple gown, silvery white with minimal adornment, and strapped on a belt from which hung a small dragonclaw dagger. She found Jorah waiting for her outside her chambers, stoic as ever. The moment she saw him, she felt a surge of gratitude. "Good morning, Ser," she greeted, forcing a small smile. "I did not mean to keep you waiting." He bowed his head. "I wanted to be certain you were safe. Shall we go?" She nodded, and they walked together in silence through the long corridors of Xaro's palace. Under the bright morning light, the intricacies of the architecture stood out more clearly. There were mosaics on the walls depicting peacocks and tigers, precious stones inlaid in swirling patterns. It was beautiful, but to Daenerys it also felt hollow, as though reminding her that wealth without purpose was a gilded cage. At last, they reached the dining hall. Zorro reclined on a plush divan piled with silk cushions, feasting on a plate of sweet fruits. He rose with theatrical delight when she entered, bowing low. "My sweet queen," he said, "come eat with me. We must see you nourished." She inclined her head, seating herself on a cushion across from him. Jorah stood behind her, arms folded, watchful. Servants brought platters of melon slices, figs, and candied nuts, setting them before Daenerys. She accepted only a small portion. Zorro clucked his tongue. "You must eat more, my queen. You have the look of someone who endured a restless night." She forced a polite smile. "I have been thinking of how best to handle the Warlocks' threats, and how to secure my journey from Qarth to new lands. Perhaps you have counsel." Zorro's eyes glimmered with opportunism. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as though imparting a great secret. "It is quite simple, my dear. You must remain in Qarth under my protection. The Warlocks do not dare cross my threshold. My name still carries weight, and in time you will find the means to leave safely, perhaps with a strong alliance at your side." He gave her a loaded smile. She understood well enough. That alliance would be sealed, as he had always wanted, with a marriage bond. Her eyes flicked toward Jorah. He studied the mosaic floor, jaw set, saying nothing. She exhaled softly, shifting her gaze back to Zorro. "I appreciate your protection. We would surely be in dire straits without it. But I cannot remain here indefinitely," she said. "I have a destiny. I must cross the sea and reclaim the throne that was stolen from my family. My father's seat, my birthright." Zorro spread his hands, feigning sympathy. "And do you have an army, my dear? A navy, for that matter? The Warlocks are only the beginning. By the time you face the might of those who rule Westeros, you will need more than 3 small dragons and a handful of loyal knights. You will need gold, ships, soldiers, and strong allies. You will need me." His words stung, because she knew they contained a seed of truth. She needed more than what she had. But to bind herself to Zorro with vows? The notion felt distasteful. He was cunning, prone to flattering speech and hidden motives. A marriage to him would be a prison, with or without the Warlocks. Yet was there another path? She composed herself. "I will consider your offer," she lied. Perhaps not entirely, for in the back of her mind, she wondered if desperation might force her hand. "For now, I ask only for your continued hospitality, until I find a better recourse." Zorro smiled indulgently, as though humoring a child. "But of course, my sweet queen, my home is yours." She nodded. "Then, if you will excuse me, I must speak with my people. We need to consider our position carefully." Zorro swept out an arm in a grand gesture, and she rose, offering him a cool courtesy before leaving. Jorah fell into step beside her as they exited the dining hall. The hush between them felt charged, as though each had unspoken thoughts. It was Jorah who finally broke the silence. "You do not trust him," he said. "Nor do I," she sighed. "No, I do not. But we need a safe place to rest, if only for a short time. The Warlocks, Piet Pri, will not easily give up on capturing me or my dragons. Tell me, Jorah, do you think they will dare to move against Zorro's palace directly?" He considered. "From what I have seen, the Warlocks have grown bold with the return of magic to the world, but they remain cautious about open confrontation. Attacking you here would mean a battle in broad daylight, with many witnesses." She nodded, satisfied that Zorro's walls might at least deter them for now. Then her mind drifted to the illusions. "When you came for me," she murmured, "I was ensnared by illusions. I saw glimpses of the throne, of a red door from my childhood, of things I cannot fully remember. Did I lose something vital by letting you drag me away?" Jorah looked unsettled. "I do not know. I only saw you in danger. They would have harmed you. I could not stand idly by." A part of her yearned to blame him for denying her the Warlock's final prophecy. But in truth, she felt only relief to have escaped. She took a breath, pushing aside regrets. Whatever knowledge they might have offered would have come at too great a cost. Thank you, Jorah, for saving me." He inclined his head in a slight bow, as though her thanks weighed heavily upon him. "It is my honor." Over the following days, Daenerys remained inside Xaro's palace, trying to piece together a strategy. Her dragons grew more restless. Drogon especially roamed the corridors, letting out small bursts of flame that alarmed the servants. She found him perched on balconies, watching the city sprawl beyond the high walls. Sometimes, when she looked into his molten eyes, she felt that he too yearned for more than this gilded cage. The threat of the Warlocks hung over her. Rumors drifted through the palace. Sightings of cloaked figures in the streets near Xaro's estate whispered warnings that Piet Pri had sworn vengeance for the wound inflicted by Jorah. She imagined the Warlock's pale face, twisted with malice, and tried not to shudder. Yet no direct attack came. Instead, a subtle shift in Qarth's social tides occurred. Invitations to dine in the manors of other 13 became scarce. Word traveled that Daenerys Targaryen was ensconced in Xaro's palace under uncertain circumstances, that she had defied the Warlocks, that her dragons were no longer mere curiosities but harbingers of something more potent and dangerous. Even some of Xaro's associates quietly withdrew, no longer eager to host or support the Targaryen claimant. She felt the isolation keenly, but she refused to cower. Each day, she donned her dignity like armor, holding court in a modest antechamber that Xaro allowed her. She accepted those who dared come, heard their pleas or business propositions, but found little of substance. The days felt stagnant, smothering her ambitions. One evening, after the hush of dusk had settled over the palace, she summoned Jorah and her closest advisors, few as they were, to discuss their next move. They gathered in a small lounge with high windows that overlooked the city. A single crescent moon illuminated the rooftops below. The warm glow of lanterns lit the interior, casting long shadows across the ornate carpets. Daenerys stood by the window, arms crossed, gazing out at Qarth's labyrinthine streets. Jorah stood behind her, arms folded. Two of her blood riders, who had survived the Red Waste with her, lounged near the door, exchanging quiet words. Missandei, who in this alternate scenario might have already joined her or not, but let us say she had found her, was absent, as she had not yet been discovered in Slaver's Bay. Daenerys missed the cunning and translations that had aided her in the main story. But here she made do with what she had. "At sunrise tomorrow," she said, turning to face them, "I will go to the docks. I wish to see what ships are moored there, what captains might be hired. I cannot linger here forever. Xaro will soon attempt to press his demands. I must make a decision before that." One blood rider bowed his head. "You are the Khaleesi. If you say we march, we march. If you say we sail, we sail. We follow you." She offered a faint smile. "Thank you, but we must be cautious. The Warlocks might lurk. If they learn I plan to leave, they could strike preemptively. Jorah, I will need your watchful eye. I will not go alone." He nodded, expression grim. "I will go with you, if that is your wish. It would be best if you took only a small guard. We do not want to draw too much attention." Daenerys agreed. "Yes, we shall slip out quietly if possible. I will bring just you and one of my blood riders. We will speak to the captains, see if any can be trusted. Then we will return to the palace before midday." "That is the plan." They parted ways soon after. Daenerys tried to sleep, but restless thoughts plagued her. She rose before dawn, dressing in a cloak to conceal her silver-gold hair and the radiance of her attire. She left her dragons behind, locked within her bedchamber with careful instructions to the guards. They had grown attached to her, but for now it was safer that they remain hidden. In the courtyard, Jorah and the Blood Rider waited, likewise cloaked. They opened the palace's rear gate quietly, slipping into Qarth's awakening streets. The city was still in the grip of early morning hush, merchants setting up stalls, beggars curled in alleyways, the sky tinted with the first pale streaks of day. Daenerys strode with her companions, hood drawn low, all too aware that warlocks might haunt these very streets. They reached the docks soon enough, where the smell of salt and fish mingled with the pungent stench of rotting seaweed. Ships of many sizes bobbed at anchor, their sails furled against the faint breeze. Sailors bustled about in subdued chaos, loading cargo, shouting instructions, sorting nets. Daenerys felt a pang of longing. She had seen the ocean's expanse before, had dreamed of crossing it to reclaim her heritage. Would this be the day she found her path forward? She and Jorah visited 3 captains in succession, inquiring discreetly about the possibility of passage for her retinue. The first captain, from Pentos, demanded an exorbitant sum. The second captain, from Myr, insisted he would not carry dragons, citing superstitious fears that they might bring storms. The third was more receptive, a woman from the Summer Isles who commanded a sleek caravel. She listened to Daenerys's request politely, then bowed her head. "I have heard rumors," she said. "They say the mother of dragons bears living flame upon her shoulder. Some say your creatures are a marvel to behold. Others say they are an omen of doom. I cannot decide which is true." Daenerys lowered her hood, meeting the woman's gaze. "They are my children," she said softly. "Their birth heralds great change, yes, but do not mistake that for doom. I will pay fairly for passage. More than fairly if you are brave enough." The woman considered a long moment, her dark eyes shrewd. "My next journey is north, across the Jade Sea, then west toward Lys. If you wish to travel that route, I may have space for you. But rumor says your enemies gather in Qarth. If it is dangerous to harbor you, I would need assurance that my crew and I would be safe." Daenerys wanted to promise her the world, but she curbed her eagerness. She glanced at Jorah, who gave a small nod. "We can bring our own guards," Daenerys said. "Ensure your safety if you face direct confrontation. And upon landing in Lys, I can see to it that you are paid beyond your wildest expectations." The woman stroked her chin. "That is a temptation indeed. Very well. If you are prepared to sail soon, I can make arrangements. But you must give me a day or two to ready supplies for your guard, your dragons, and any other retinue you bring." Daenerys inclined her head in gratitude. "That is acceptable. I will meet you here in 2 days' time. In the meantime, keep our arrangement discreet." The captain gave a half-smile. "I am skilled at discretion, but be wary. The city watches you with many eyes." They parted ways. Daenerys felt a spark of hope kindled within her. A ship, a path forward. True, Lys was not Westeros, but it was a step closer than Qarth, and from Lys she might gather more resources, perhaps mercenaries. She walked away from the docks, Jorah at her side, the Blood Rider trailing behind, weaving through the growing throng of morning traffic. Suddenly, Daenerys's Blood Rider tensed. She saw the movement in the corner of her eye, a cloaked figure stepping out from between 2 stacked crates, raising a hand toward her. Jorah's sword was half-drawn, but not fast enough. A cold voice hissed, "Mother of Dragons, Piet Pri sends his regards." Something glinted in the figure's hand. Blue flame danced, forming a spectral dagger. Daenerys barely had time to gasp before the Warlock lunged. Jorah sprang forward, parrying with steel, but the spectral blade only half-clashed with his sword, continuing onward with preternatural force. She stumbled back, narrowly evading the blow. Her Blood Rider rushed in, swinging a curved blade. The Warlock vanished, dissolving into a swirl of thick blue smoke. Then, just as abruptly, he reformed behind them, spectral dagger raised once more. Daenerys's heart thundered. She spun, stepping back, searching for a weapon. She still had the small dagger at her hip. She yanked it free, cursing the Warlock's illusions under her breath. Jorah's eyes darted, trying to track the Warlock's reappearances. The early morning crowd on the docks shrieked, scattering in every direction. Crates tumbled, ropes snapped. Another swirl of smoke, and the Warlock manifested near Daenerys again, dagger slashing. She felt its bite against her forearm, slicing through cloth, drawing blood. A searing pain flared. Jorah bellowed in rage, swinging his sword in a wide arc that caught the Warlock across the shoulder. The blow would have decapitated a normal man, but the illusion-wrought body only partially resisted. Blue flame flickered, and the Warlock hissed, eyes blazing with hatred. He seemed to flicker between tangibility and smoke, as though struggling to maintain his form. "Run, Khaleesi!" Jorah growled, but she stood her ground, pressing her wounded arm to her side. The warlock turned his gaze upon her, and she felt the weight of his malice. Pyat Pree was behind this assault, no doubt. Perhaps Pyat Pree himself was controlling this minion from afar. With a snarl, the warlock lunged again. The Blood Rider leapt between them, parrying with his arak. The dagger of blue flame crackled upon the curved steel. For an instant, the two locked eyes, and then the Blood Rider slashed upward. The warlock's form split, dissolving into swirling smoke. This time, the smoke did not reform. It drifted away on the breeze, leaving behind only an echo of hateful laughter. Daenerys exhaled, heart pounding. Her forearm throbbed, and she glanced down to see the gash welling blood. Nothing mortal, but it stung fiercely. Jorah was at her side instantly, pressing a strip of cloth to the wound. "We must leave now. You see, they will not wait. They have watchers," he said. "Anywhere you go in this city, they will strike." She nodded, mind racing. "We found a ship, a captain who will take us to Lys," she whispered. "But she needs 2 days. Can we last 2 days in Qarth, or must we leave at once?" Jorah's expression was grim. "We can try to last 2 days, but the Warlocks have shown they can strike in the open. We might not be safe even in Xaro's palace." Even so, Daenerys saw no choice. The ship would not be ready to sail at once. They had no other arrangement. "We return to Xaro's palace. If another attempt is made there, we fight back or flee immediately if needed." She tried to steel herself, ignoring the throbbing in her arm. Her Blood Rider wiped his blade clean, glaring at the place where the warlock had dissolved. The three of them hurried from the docks, merging with the frightened crowd that parted to let them pass. Daenerys clutched her cloak tight, feeling both fear and anger swirl within her. The warlocks would not relent, and if they succeeded in capturing her or her dragons, Qarth itself would become a tomb. They reached Xaro's palace in a storm of tension. When Xaro saw her bleeding arm, he made a great show of dismay, summoning healers. "My dear queen, this is unacceptable. How can I allow you to be assaulted in the streets of my fair city?" She let the healers bind her wound but offered him little courtesy in response. "Fair city indeed," she said coldly. "You see how the warlocks move against me. I must ask for a double watch at every gate. No one is to come or go without your personal approval." Xaro nodded magnanimously. "Of course, anything for my honored guest." Though his compliance seemed earnest, Daenerys sensed calculation in his gaze. He would protect her, yes, because her presence still offered him leverage. If she ended up beholden to him for safety, she might have no choice but to accept his marriage proposal. The thought rankled. She withdrew to her chambers, Jorah following. Once inside, she sank onto a low seat, ignoring the lavish furniture around her. Drogon scurried forward, sniffing at the bandage on her arm. A small hiss escaped him as if in warning. She scratched his chin gently. "Hush, I am all right," she soothed, though her heart felt far from calm. Jorah hovered in the doorway, reluctant to interrupt her thoughts. Finally, he said, "Khaleesi, we are pinned. We need to maintain a low profile, but you know they can strike anywhere. Are you sure you wish to wait 2 days for that ship?" She looked up at him. Her silver hair fell around her face, and she pushed it aside. "I do not see another way. We have no other vessel at our disposal. I would rather take my chances in Lys than remain here, fighting warlocks at every turn." He nodded, running a hand through his short hair. "Then I will bolster your guard. Remain vigilant. We will ensure that no one gains entry to these chambers without permission." She could see the tension in his stance. Jorah wore guilt like a second skin, as though saving her from the House of the Undying had triggered all these consequences. She rose, stepping toward him. "Ser Jorah," she said softly, "do not blame yourself for these attacks. The warlocks would have moved against me eventually. You did what you thought was best." His gaze flicked to hers, and she saw turmoil in his eyes. I only wanted to protect you, Khaleesi. She laid her uninjured hand gently on his arm. I know, and you have. Now we must survive these next days, and then we leave Qarth behind us. Together, he dipped his head. Your will is mine. And so the vigil began. The next day passed in a haze of tension. Xaro's palace was sealed. No one entered or left without thorough scrutiny by Daenerys' guards. She spent the day ensuring her dragons were fed, ordering the remainder of her people to pack whatever they needed for travel. While no formal agreement existed with Xaro that she would depart, she expected him to glean it soon enough. If he tried to stop her, she would face that challenge when it arose. Night fell, and Daenerys tried to rest, though her nerves were frayed. Just before midnight, she was awakened by a faint noise beyond her chamber door. She sat up, blinking in the darkness. Drogon lifted his head, hissing softly. Rhaegal and Viserion stirred, their scales rustling. She listened, muscles tense. A muffled commotion, then a cry, steel clashing. Her heart leapt in her chest. She rushed to the door, flinging it open, ignoring the quickening pain in her bandaged arm. Torches flickered in the corridor, revealing two of her guards engaged in combat with an intruder cloaked in midnight blue. Daenerys recognized the Warlock's gaunt features, the same glassy eyes. She did not know if it was Piet Pri himself or another of his brethren. She could see illusions swirling, half-formed shapes of shadows that reached out like tendrils, trying to ensnare her guards. One guard slashed wildly, cutting through the illusions with blind fury. The Warlock laughed, taking a step closer. Another swirl of blue flame erupted from his hands. Daenerys had no time to think, only to act. She took a deep breath, summoning the queenly rage that smoldered in her chest. "Dracarys!" she shouted. Instantly, Drogon leapt from the shadows behind her. The black dragon soared over her shoulder, jaws parted, a plume of flame spewing forth. The corridor exploded with orange light and blistering heat. The Warlock shrieked, illusions dissolving in an instant. He tried to vanish into a swirl of smoke, but Drogon's fire caught him mid-transformation, turning that ephemeral smoke to cinders. In seconds, the Warlock's body collapsed into ash on the marble floor. Daenerys blinked, reeling, as the fire's glow flickered on the blackened stone. Her guards panted, stepping back, sweat beading on their faces. She felt her breath shake. Another attempt had been thwarted, but just barely. The Warlocks had penetrated even Xaro's locked palace. She heard footsteps racing down the corridor. Jorah arrived, sword in hand, several more guards behind him. They beheld the scorched remains of the Warlock with shock. Jorah's gaze flicked to her, taking in the rumpled nightgown she wore, the tangle of her hair, the smoldering corridor. "Khaleesi, are you?" "I am fine," she said, though her heart pounded like a war drum. "But we can no longer wait. The Warlocks will not be stopped by locked gates. We must leave Qarth at once." He nodded, grim. "We will gather everything and depart before dawn." She began issuing orders. The palace awoke in a flurry, servants scurrying, her guards doubling their watch. By the time the sky turned pale, Daenerys was ready. She donned a traveler's outfit, leathers, and a hooded cloak. Her dragons perched about her, edgy, as though they sensed the tension. She found Xaro in one of his halls, pacing in a silken robe. The reek of smoke still clung to the air. "Daenerys, my dear, what is the meaning of this upheaval?" he demanded, rubbing at his eyes. "My palace is in shambles. My gates are being unbarred. Where are you going?" She lifted her chin. "Away. I can no longer stay in Qarth. The Warlocks do not fear your walls. They will come again, and I will not wait for another attack. I must take my dragons to a place of safety." Xaro's mouth twisted with concern and frustration. "But you cannot simply leave me like this. We had an arrangement. I have provided you with shelter and comfort. Are you not, at least, indebted to me?" She felt a trace of guilt, but the memory of the Warlocks creeping into her chambers banished any second thoughts. "You have been a gracious host," she acknowledged, But that debt is not worth my life, nor the lives of my dragons. I cannot remain here. A flicker of something dark passed across Xaro's face. Anger, betrayal, or maybe fear. But before he could speak, her guards stepped in. Jorah loomed behind her, sword at his side. The message was clear. Xaro could not prevent her departure unless he wished to fight. He would surely lose. In the end, Xaro forced a gracious smile. If you must go, then go. But do remember the generosity I have shown you. When you sit the Iron Throne, do not forget who sheltered you in your time of need. She offered a curt nod. I will not forget. With that, Daenerys swept from the palace, her retinue in tow, the dragons clinging to her shoulders and arms. The sun was just cresting the horizon, casting Qarth in a golden glow that belied the danger lurking behind every column. She felt no regret as they left Xaro's grand gate, entering the city streets. The palace gates slammed shut behind them, leaving that chapter of her life sealed. They moved swiftly toward the docks. Her blood riders and Jorah formed a protective circle around her. Passers-by gawked at the sight. The silver-haired woman with 3 living dragons, flanked by grim-faced warriors. Daenerys ignored their stares, pressing forward. She could almost taste the salt in the air, feel the open seas call beckoning. She prayed that the Summer Islander captain would be ready to sail sooner than promised, or at least that she would not turn Daenerys away. But as they neared the wharf, a chill rippled through her. She caught sight of flickering shadows amid the milling crowds. Warlocks? She remembered all too well how they could appear and vanish. Her heart pounded. Jorah placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, guiding her onward. At last they found the ship. Its hull was sleek and dark, a single mast rising high. Sailors hurried along the deck, stowing crates and coiling ropes. The captain stood at the gangplank, scanning the morning bustle. When she spotted Daenerys, her eyes widened. I did not expect you so soon, the captain said, stepping forward. But we are nearly ready. You are leaving in quite a hurry, it seems. Daenerys nodded, relief flooding her. The situation is dire. Will you still take me and my people aboard? The captain glanced around, perhaps noting the intensity in Daenerys' stance. It will be dangerous for me, you understand. But if your gold is good. Daenerys motioned to one of her men, who hefted a small chest of valuables they had gathered. Some gifts from Xaro, some tokens of her own. She opened it, revealing glittering ornaments and coins. This is yours if we sail immediately, she said. And there is more if we reach Lys safely. The captain's eyes gleamed. We sail in an hour, then. I must finalize provisions, and we must cast off before the harbor master grows suspicious. Board now and keep those dragons under control. Daenerys smiled wryly, stepping onto the gangplank, feeling a tremor of anticipation. The sailors gazed in awe as she climbed aboard, flanked by her retinue. The dragons hissed, unsettled by the shifting deck beneath their claws. She found a place near the ship's stern, where she could stand and watch the city of Qarth behind them. One of the blood riders stationed himself near the prow, scanning for threats. Jorah stood with Daenerys, arms crossed, protective gaze sweeping the docks. The captain was already barking orders. Sails were being unfurled, ropes tightened, crates slid into place, half-lashed in a hurry. Only a trickle of dawn's soft breeze whispered across the water, but it was enough to carry the ship away from the pier once the rowers began guiding her out of the harbor. Daenerys' heart thumped as she saw the city recede, the high walls of Qarth shrinking in the distance. She exhaled a breath she had not realized she was holding. She was free of Qarth, the House of the Undying, the Warlocks, Piet Pri and his illusions. She was leaving them all behind. She looked to Jorah. His expression was equally charged with relief. We did it, she murmured. We are away from that cursed city. He inclined his head. Though I fear the Warlock's wrath may not end here, Khaleesi. Their magic may extend beyond Qarth's walls. We should remain vigilant. But for now, you are safe. She turned to the sea, scanning the horizon. The water shimmered with morning light, calm but unfathomably deep. In truth, I do not feel safe, she admitted quietly. "But I feel alive. My path has changed, Ser Jorah. I did not see the visions in the House of the Undying. I do not know what signs or prophecy I may have missed, but I do know that I will forge my own destiny, no matter what illusions they tried to trap me with." He nodded gravely. "Yes, you will, Khaleesi. We will find a way." As the ship glided onward, Daenerys could not help but reflect on the turning point that had come when Jorah burst into the House of the Undying. Had she remained, had Drogon burned the Warlocks from within their lair, perhaps she would have gleaned those fateful images of the past and future that, in another life, had shaped her path toward the Iron Throne. But here, her knowledge was incomplete, guided instead by the pressing threat of the Warlocks' open attacks. She felt uncertainty gnaw at her. Where, now, would she turn to gather the forces she needed? How would she navigate Lys, or any of the free cities, without the foundation of prophecy or her alliances with those who might fear her dragons, or revere them? She clenched her hands on the ship's rail, inhaling the brine-laden wind. She was no stranger to forging her own road, but the dragons at her side were still small, each day growing, but far from the mighty creatures they would become. She would need to protect them, train them, and in time, unleash them against those who would oppose her. Over the next hours, the city of Qarth faded into the distance, no longer visible except as a faint haze on the horizon. The Summer Islander captain set her course for the open sea. Daenerys remained near the stern, her mind churning with questions. Jorah approached occasionally to update her, or to confirm that all was well. Her blood riders watched the water, as though expecting Warlocks to appear from beneath the waves. But none came. That night, Daenerys slipped into a fitful sleep in the cramped cabin the captain had granted her. The gentle rocking of the ship lulled her at times, but nightmares came in waves, dark illusions that reminded her of the House of the Undying. She saw flickers of Piet Pri, a mocking grin, and heard him hiss, "You cannot escape us." She saw the Iron Throne in her dreams, draped in shadow. Sometimes, she saw her dragons, grown to monstrous size, flying across a burning sky, but she could not tell if it was a glimpse of the future or a product of her restless imagination. She woke in a cold sweat, heart hammering. Drogon hovered near her on a small table, eyes gleaming in the lantern light. He crooned softly, as if in comfort. She stroked his snout, murmuring that she was fine. She was mother and queen both, a terrified girl and a woman of unyielding resolve. The illusions from the Warlocks no longer bound her, but their echoes persisted. For weeks the ship traveled. They passed turquoise waters, navigated shifting tides, occasionally stopped at small ports for fresh water and provisions. Daenerys tried to glean any word of Westeros from passing vessels, but the news was sparse. Whispers of war, of kings vying for the Iron Throne, but no details. She felt a growing impatience. She was so far away still. On the open sea, the dragons began to stretch their wings. She allowed them on the deck under careful supervision. The sailors watched in wonder as Drogon, Rhaegal, and Viserion tested short flights above the ship's mast. Sometimes they soared a few dozen feet away before fluttering back. Their flames, while still modest, were beginning to grow. Daenerys smiled each time she saw them riding the wind. She felt their vigor as a promise of the future, a future she would shape, illusions be damned. At last, the ship approached Lys, known for its pleasure houses and labyrinthine intrigues. The city's harbor was a swirl of pastel buildings, slender towers rising amid a cluster of lesser structures, with the sweet scent of exotic perfume drifting across the water. Daenerys stood by the prow, cloak rippling, scanning for any sign of potential allies or threats. Jorah joined her, quiet for a time as he took in the sight. "They call Lys the city of Daenerys," he remarked, referencing some local deity. "Pleasure and luxury abound here, but so do slavers and mercenaries. We must tread carefully." Daenerys nodded. "We will. I have no illusions about what we will find. But if we can hire a mercenary company, or perhaps gain the favor of a wealthy patron, we may continue west, or south, or anywhere that leads us closer to an army. One step at a time." The Summer Islander captain guided the ship into harbor. Daenerys paid her the promised sum, thanking her for her loyalty. The captain, gold in hand, advised Daenerys with a wry smile to avoid the city's less savory districts if she did not wish to lose her purse or her dragons. Daenerys took note, though she knew that to find the cell's words she desired, she might have to risk dealings in the city's shadows. So began Daenerys Targaryen's next chapter, shaped by a single choice made in the House of the Undying. Jorah Mormont's timely intervention, snatching her from the Warlocks' illusions before she could glean the prophecies that once guided her. Now, no visions of a blue rose blooming in a wall of ice. No cryptic portents of a dragon dancing among falling stars. She had only her determination, her dragons, and a loyal knight who would follow her into any fire. She stepped onto the wharf, the Lysine sun on her face, the clang of bells in the distance. This was not the path she had once trod in that other telling of her life. It was not Astapor, nor Yunkai, nor Meereen, but she was Daenerys Stormborn, the unburnt, mother of dragons, rightful queen of Westeros. She would carve her own destiny from the marble and dust of these foreign shores, forging alliances and facing trials she had never anticipated. She would become a conqueror in her own way. As she led her small retinue into the bustling streets of Lys, her dragons close at hand, she felt a curious blend of fear and exhilaration. The Warlocks had sought to break her will, to steal her dragons, but her spirit remained unbowed. She knew danger still lurked behind every corner. She knew the illusions might haunt her dreams forever. But the sea air tasted of freedom, and the sun glinted off Drogon's scales as he perched upon her shoulder, black wings half spread. She walked onward, proud and unafraid, guided not by cryptic prophecies but by the unshakable fire in her own heart. And thus, with one stroke of fate, Ser Jorah Mormont's rescue, her journey to power had changed forever. Yet the dragon's path remained forged in flame and blood, unwavering in its pursuit of destiny. She was, after all, Daenerys Targaryen. The world would tremble at her coming, whether she carried prophecy's banner or not. The sky was wide, her dragons were growing, and her ambition burned brighter than any warlock's flame. She would find her throne or die trying, illusions be damned. The sun was bright over Lys that morning, the ocean breeze carrying a faint blend of sweet perfume and brine. As Daenerys Targaryen stepped onto the wharf, she was struck at once by how different the city felt from Qarth, where everything had glittered with surface opulence yet hidden sharp edges of treachery. Here, in the famed pleasure city of Essos, the buildings were painted in pastel hues, and slender towers rose amid gardens and courtyards, balconies draped with flowering vines. The hum of commerce and laughter drifted from the dockside taverns. Yet beneath that pleasant veneer, the sharp eyes of sellswords and slavers alike skimmed the crowds, ever searching for opportunities. She walked forward with her retinue, cloak drawn around her shoulders. Jorah Mormont flanked her on one side, hand never far from his sword hilt, while on her other side, a tall bloodrider kept an eye on the bustling throng. Her dragons clung close. Drogon perched upon her left shoulder, his claws carefully gripping her leather pauldron, while Regal and Viserion prowled around her ankles or hopped onto crates to peer at their surroundings. The sailors on the dock kept a respectful distance, half in awe and half in fear, for who would dare stand in the path of a woman who carried live dragons? The Summer Islander captain who had borne Daenerys across the sea lingered just long enough to supervise the offloading of crates and to collect one final pouch of gold from her. "I wish you good fortune," the captain said as she weighed the coins, her expression neither hostile nor warm, merely practical. "Lys is no city for the faint of heart. Everything here has a price." "I thank you," Daenerys replied, inclining her head. "Your courage in sailing early saved us precious time. If fate is kind, our paths may cross again someday." It was the polite farewell of a queen, though she was not always sure she felt like one. She had only a handful of loyalists to her name, and the memory of Warlocks haunting her from Qarth was still raw. When they turned away from the water, her eyes swept the crowd. Fishermen and merchants jostled with sleek courtesans gliding through the streets. Lys was famed for its pleasure houses, but also for the labyrinth of hidden powers beneath the silks and perfumes. Slavers found easy pickings here. Mercenaries came to hire themselves out in the endless wars of the disputed lands. Daenerys felt a flutter of caution. She was here to find allies, or at least sellswords who might carry her one step closer to her destiny. But she was also aware that every promise of alliance could be a trap. They made their way to a modest inn near the harbor. Xaro's coin, what little remained, augmented by a few baubles she had managed to smuggle from Qarth, would stretch only so far, and she had no wish to lavish her wealth on luxuries when survival was paramount. The inn was built of white stone, with shutters painted a faded green. A sign outside bore a crescent moon symbol. Inside, the air smelled of roasted fish and sweet wine. The plaster walls hung with tattered tapestries. The innkeeper, a wiry woman with dyed blue hair, eyed Daenerys' retinue warily, but her eyes went wide at the sight of the 3 small dragons. Her expression hovered between alarm and fascination. "We need rooms," Daenerys said in Low Valyrian, the language more common here than the Eastern dialect she had used in Qarth. Her accent made the innkeeper peer at her curiously, but the woman's business sense outweighed her curiosity. "How many nights, my lady?" asked the innkeeper. "That depends," Daenerys replied. "We shall pay day by day, for we do not yet know how long we will stay." At a gesture from Daenerys, one of the blood riders handed over a small coin pouch. The innkeeper took a silver coin, bit it to test, then nodded in satisfaction. She showed them up a narrow staircase to 2 adjoining chambers. Both were small, but each had a shuttered window overlooking a side alley. It was not the palatial comfort of Xaro's manse, but at least the walls did not glisten with the menace she had felt in Qarth. Daenerys thanked the innkeeper, who scurried back downstairs. The moment the innkeeper was gone, Daenerys surveyed the rooms. The first was a bit larger, so she decided it would serve as her own quarters. She set her pack down, and her dragons crawled across the worn floorboards, sniffing the air. Jorah placed a hand on the hilt of his sword, scanning the corners with a soldier's caution. The blood rider hovered in the doorway, unsmiling, alert. They had learned hard lessons in Qarth. Locked gates meant nothing to the Warlocks. Here, in Lys, there could be 100 different threats, not just Piet Pri's illusions. Yet they had to start somewhere. Daenerys reached up to stroke Drogon's head. "We must be cautious until we learn who rules the streets here. I know Lys is governed by magisters and wealthy families, all reliant on the pleasure trade. But the sellswords move freely, fighting in the disputed lands or hiring out to foreign lords." Jorah inclined his head. "Aye, Khaleesi. Mercenary companies sometimes pass through Lys for recruitment. The Golden Company is rumored to have contacts here, though their main base is said to be in the hinterlands. The Second Sons are known to roam between Myr, Tyrosh, and Lys, taking contracts where they can. And there may be smaller bands as well." She knew of the Golden Company's storied reputation. Once founded by Targaryen bastards in exile, they were said to be the greatest of the free companies, seldom broken in battle. But would they serve a Targaryen claimant, or scorn her? Rumor held that the Golden Company had once followed Blackfyre pretenders who had challenged the main Targaryen line. Yet they were famed for loyalty to their contract, not necessarily to Targaryen blood. She felt a stir of uncertainty. "We will learn all we can," she decided, voice steady. "We will find who might consider an alliance with Daenerys Stormborn, and we will weigh their demands." She paced to the narrow window and looked out onto the alley, where a few stray cats prowled. Beyond them, she could glimpse part of a wide thoroughfare, lined with fruit stalls and peddlers. Lys felt vibrant in a different way than Qarth, less showy yet equally steeped in wealth. Banners fluttered from balconies, and the calls of merchants mingled with the faint chiming of distant bells. She wondered if any Warlocks had followed her across the sea. It seemed unlikely that they would simply abandon their obsession. Piet Pri would not shrug and forget his vengeance. But perhaps the gap of water gave her some respite. She could only hope. Turning to Jorah, she said, "We should not hide here all day. Let us move about the city and gather information. I'll take 2 blood riders for safety, but let the rest remain to guard the inn and the dragons. I will only bring Drogon for now. Regal and Viserion can stay here, locked inside. It was a small risk. She hated to separate from any of her dragons. But having 3 young dragons on the streets of Lys would draw a swarm of unwanted attention. At least with Drogon perched on her shoulder, she could keep an eye on him and he on her. Jorah nodded, though Daenerys saw the flicker of worry in his eyes at the idea of strolling such a city with no more than a handful of guards. But a large retinue would be even more conspicuous, so they reached an uneasy agreement. She pulled on a hooded cloak to cover her hair, and, after a moment's hesitation, concealed Drogon beneath its folds. The little dragon snorted in mild protest but quieted when she stroked his head. So began her first foray into Lys. They descended the inn stairs, parted with half their men, and stepped onto the bustling street. Jorah and 2 blood riders took positions around her in a loose diamond, scanning every face in the crowd. Exotic fish were laid out on trays, local street performers banged drums, children scurried between stalls. To Daenerys' relief, few paid much attention to her. They saw only 4 cloaked figures among many. As they made their way toward the city's heart, passing under balconies hung with silks, Daenerys could sense the underlying decadence of Lys. Perfume stalls abounded, hawking fragrances said to inflame desire. Men and women in scant clothing loitered at doorways, offering winks and propositions to passers-by. On corner after corner, she spotted taverns with signs shaped like roses, stars, or entwined lovers. The city took pride in its pursuit of pleasure, with an easy fluidity that Daenerys found both intriguing and faintly unsettling. She had grown accustomed to being on her guard. Here, pleasure was for sale as openly as fruit. Once in a while, the glint of steel caught her eye. She saw sellswords in small knots, some in battered armor, others in flamboyant attire that was more for show than practical use. The swirl of dialects reminded her that Lys was a crossroads for travelers from many corners of the world. She heard the thick accents of Tyrosh, the drawl of Myr, even the sharp cadences of Bravos. By noon, they had reached a district near the center of the city where a great fountain splashed, surrounded by stone benches and a small market. Here, Jorah halted her with a hand on her arm. "Khaleesi," he murmured, leaning close. "See there, beyond the fountain." She followed his gaze. A tall man in partial plate armor stood with arms folded, a curved sword at his waist, and a half-cape draped across one shoulder. For others loitered near him, each wearing a crimson sash around the waist. The man was speaking to a Lysine merchant with forceful gestures. Daenerys recognized the bearing of a professional soldier. Shoulders squared, chin lifted, that distinctive watchful stillness. One of her blood riders whispered, "They bear the sign of the Painted Spear, a small free company. I have heard of them from travelers in Vis Teloro." Daenerys nodded thoughtfully. The Painted Spear was not among the great famed sellsword companies, yet she recalled hearing mention of them. A modest band, known to take varied contracts in the disputed lands. She considered approaching them to see if they might be for hire. But caution rose within her. She had no illusions that mere sellswords would follow her out of blind loyalty. They would demand gold, perhaps hostages, or at least a contract. Still, it might be wise to learn their terms. She gestured for Jorah and the blood rider to follow and approached the men. As she drew nearer, she glimpsed the stylized spear painted on the breast of the tall man's partial plate. It was chipped at the edges, as if he had seen many battles. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and Daenerys gently pushed her hood back, letting him see at least part of her face. She had no intention of unveiling her entire identity in the street, but she did not wish to appear skulking. "Good day," she said, measuring her tone in low Valyrian. "I am told you belong to the Painted Spear Company. My companions and I seek to speak with its leader." The sellsword's brows arched in mild curiosity. "And who might you be?" he asked. His accent was rough, colored by a background she could not place. Perhaps Myrish or Tyroshi. "Are you looking to hire swords, or do you come with an offer to join us?" Daenerys felt Drogon shift beneath her cloak, but the dragon made no sound. She dipped her head slightly. I might be interested in a contract if your rates are fair. My business is urgent. Is your captain here in Lys? He looked her up and down, his gaze snagging on the line of her jaw and the hood that partly concealed her face. Then he nodded toward a nearby plaza. Our captain is at the Red Hibiscus, a tavern just beyond that arch. You'll find him there, this time of day. His manner was guarded, but not hostile. Name's Daho. Tell the tavern keeper that you're looking for Captain Morito. He'll be inside. Daenerys nodded. Thank you. He waved a hand, returning to his business with the merchant. Jorah gave Daenerys a careful look. Are you certain you want to do this so openly? We don't know these men. She met his eyes. We know no one in Lys. We must begin somewhere. We'll gauge their demands. If they prove dishonorable or unscrupulous, we'll seek another path. She took a breath and walked on. They passed under a tall stone arch that had once been carved with erotic friezes, now worn down by decades of salt air. Beyond it lay a quieter plaza lined with potted flowers, great waxy hibiscus blooms in shades of red and pink. A squat building with a sign shaped like a hibiscus flower sat in the shade of a crooked tower. The tavern door stood open, letting out the scent of spiced wine. Through the open door drifted the low hum of conversation. When Daenerys stepped inside, her eyes took a moment to adjust to the dimness. The tavern was modest, with tables scattered and a small bar where a pair of barrel-chested men polished cups. At one table sat a group of Sellswords playing a dice game. Their voices trailed off at the sight of her. In the corner, a lone figure hunched over a bowl of stew, and to one side, near a broad window, lounged a dark-haired man in partial armor with the painted spear insignia on a battered leather pauldron. His boots rested on a second chair, and he sipped from a tall cup. A slender woman in revealing silk hovered near him, perhaps a serving girl. Daenerys drew back her hood a bit, stepping forward. Jorah and the Blood Rider followed, watchful. The man by the window looked up, eyes narrowing. He said something to the serving girl, who moved away quickly. Then he placed his cup aside, letting his feet drop to the floor, and gave Daenerys a considering stare. You must be the one Daho mentioned, he said in a faintly amused tone. Or so I guess, since we seldom get hooded strangers approaching us here. You don't look Lysine anyway. What do you want with Captain Morito? Daenerys kept her voice calm but firm. I want to speak with him about hiring his company. I was told he's here. He smirked. You're speaking to him, my lady. I am Captain Morito. His hair was a tangled black mane, and a scar curved along his cheek. He did not stand, though he gestured at the empty chair across from him. Sit if you wish. I'm always willing to discuss a contract, though you'll need to buy my next cup. She slid into the chair, ignoring the casual insolence. Jorah took a place behind her, and the Blood Rider lingered near the tavern wall, as if unwilling to sit among strangers. Daenerys gently rested a hand at her cloak's shoulder, feeling Drogon's warmth. She could not let the dragon loose in a tavern, but she wanted him close should trouble arise. Captain Morito looked her over, curiosity plain in his dark eyes. You speak low Valyrian well enough, but I can't place your accent. Where are you from? Far away, Daenerys answered simply. I'm not here to speak of my origins, only to determine if your company might be for hire. He shrugged. All right, my lady, that's what Sellswords do after all. Fight for coin. He leaned forward. We have about 30 men under arms in Lys right now, plus a few scattered in the disputed lands. We're not large, but we fight well. If you're looking for a large-scale war, you want the Golden Company or the Long Lances or the Second Sons. If you need a smaller force for discreet business, I can help. He rubbed his scar as he spoke, and she caught the glint of avarice in his eyes. Daenerys considered her words carefully. I need men willing to travel. This will not be a contract confined to Lys or the nearby lands. I may go west or east depending on what opportunities arise. I need swords, loyal swords, who won't betray me at the first chance of a higher bidder. Captain Morito chuckled. Loyal swords, is it? You'll find no such thing in any free company, my lady. Gold decides loyalty. Give us a reason to stay with you, and we will, so long as no one else offers us twice as much. Unless, he added, eyes narrowing, you have deeper pockets than you seem. She felt a spike of frustration. Even with the remainder of Xaro's gold, plus the valuables she carried, she knew she could not match the sums that might be offered by wealthier patrons. I can pay, she said, but not a limitless sum. I can, however, offer a share in future spoils if your men follow me into conquests that prove lucrative. Glory, wealth from plunder, perhaps even lands if we cross to Westeros. She could see his smirk deepen, as if he thought her an overambitious dreamer. She realized with a pang that she must appear exactly so. A young woman with a few guards, spinning talk of future conquests. You aim to fight in Westeros, do you? Morito said, humoring her, though skepticism was plain on his face. That's half a world away, locked in civil war as I hear. A savage place by some accounts. Hard to see how a small band like ours might claim much there, unless you plan to muster an army. But an army requires coin to feed and maintain. More coin than you have, I think. She held his gaze, refusing to flinch. That is why I am in Lys. I mean to grow my strength step by step. Those who stand with me at the start will be rewarded in the end. He chuckled, lifting his cup. A lovely promise, but promises don't pay for my men's bread and salt. Or wine. I can't speak for them if I can't promise them real gold in their palms soon. Daenerys inhaled slowly, trying to measure how best to sway him. She thought of revealing her name, Daenerys Targaryen, rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms, hoping the old Targaryen mystique might impress him. But it could just as easily alert unscrupulous rivals or slavers who would see the value in selling her to the highest bidder. Even so, she sensed that if she revealed nothing, Morito would dismiss her as a nobody. Captain, she began, voice lowered. There is more to me than meets the eye. If you would consider a small show of loyalty, you would see I can reward you more richly than you imagine. But I cannot speak freely here in a public tavern, nor can I commit all my secrets at once. If you want a taste of the power I bring, meet me at midnight at the House of Orchids by the Western Canal. Come alone or with no more than 2 men. If what you see does not convince you, then we part ways and speak no more. His brow furrowed. The House of Orchids? That's a dice den, full of shady sorts. Why meet there? She offered a small, inscrutable smile. In truth, the House of Orchids was only a name she had heard in passing as they strolled through the city, one of many less reputable establishments. But she doubted the Painted Spear would balk at shady dealings. A clandestine meeting would give her a chance to show him the dragons, to speak more openly, away from prying ears. She needed him intrigued enough not to dismiss her outright. Because it suits my purposes, she said. You will understand better tonight. In the meantime, I advise you not to share word of this conversation. You might earn yourself a coin or 2 selling gossip, but you'd lose the chance at a far greater prize. He studied her, lips pursed, then shrugged with a kind of lazy confidence. All right, my lady. You have my interest, if only because I love mysteries. You'd best not waste my time. He made a mock salute with his cup, then drained it. Now, if you'll excuse me, you did promise to pay for my next round. He grinned in a way that was almost provoking. Daenerys slid a single silver coin across the table and stood. She could sense Jorah's tension, the Bloodrider's suspicion, but she kept her composure. I'll see you tonight. Drink well, Captain Morito. She turned and left without further pleasantries, aware of his gaze following her. Outside, the afternoon heat pressed down on the city, the glare of the sun bright on white stone. Jorah fell into step beside her, voice low. Meeting him in a dice den at midnight. Khaleesi? That's a risk. This entire city is a risk, she replied, frustration bleeding into her tone. Every day we wait, we risk being discovered. The Painted Spear is not the greatest or most reputable free company, but they have swords, and I need swords. If we can convince them to travel under my banner, if we can find a way to pay them, at least for a time, then we grow from there. Jorah inclined his head, though he looked unhappy. "Will do as you say. Shall I bring a half-dozen of our men to this midnight meeting?" She hesitated. "Yes, but have them remain nearby out of sight. I want to show Morito just enough that he's intrigued. If I arrive with a small army, he may think I've come to ambush him." "Very well, Khaleesi," Jorah said. They navigated the winding lanes back toward the inn, a certain tension flickering between them as they pondered the hours to come. That night, Daenerys waited in her small chamber until the city's bells tolled the 11th hour. The alley outside was dark, the moon little more than a pale sliver behind drifting clouds. Jorah had gathered 6 of her best men, 2 of the Blood Riders and 4 who had been soldiers in her khalasar, and stationed them in vantage points near the House of Orchids. Daenerys would go with Jorah alone, plus Drogon, to keep appearances minimal. She made sure Rhaegal and Viserion were secure within the room, urging them to stay calm. Their whimpers tugged at her heart. They disliked being separated from her, especially at night, but she could not risk parading all 3 dragons through the shadows. Drogon was the boldest, and he perched at her shoulder, black wings folded, eyes glowing red in the lamplight. Though still not large, he was bigger than he'd been when she left Qarth. His neck and tail had grown a few handspans, and his wingspan was wider. He could spit a jet of flame that might kill a man at close range, and that knowledge comforted her. She and Jorah left the inn quietly, hoods drawn once more. The city's nightlife had blossomed, with torches flickering on balconies and music drifting from open doors. Shadows played across the walls, and in every corner, Daenerys glimpsed revelers or furtive figures doing business. Lys, so famed for its pleasures, was alive in the darkness with all manner of hidden transactions. Following Jorah's directions, they navigated the twisting canals until they found the House of Orchids, a low building of pale stone, its entrance flanked by carved pillars shaped like entwined lovers. A pungent smoke wafted from within, reminiscent of sweet leaf and other substances. Muted laughter and the rattle of dice drifted through the open doorway. Jorah gestured for Daenerys to wait while he peered inside. He returned, nodding that it was safe enough. They entered together. A smoky haze greeted them, along with the sight of half a dozen tables where men and women tossed dice or exchanged coins. The clientele was varied, local Lysine, sellswords, a few robed figures who might be traveling merchants. The walls were draped in threadbare tapestries painted with bright flowers. A single caged brazier in the center glowed red, providing the main source of light. At first, Daenerys saw no sign of Captain Morito, and her heart sped up. Then, in a corner near a side door, she spotted him. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, talking to 2 men who bore the painted spear insignia. He dismissed them with a wave of his hand as soon as he noticed Daenerys. They moved away, though one lingered near the dice tables, watchful. Captain Morito approached with a wry half-smile. "You came," he said. "I wasn't certain you would. Not everyone has the stomach for Lys at midnight." His gaze flicked over Jorah, then settled on Daenerys's hooded form. She inclined her head. "We have a bargain to discuss, do we not?" He gestured toward the side door. "Come, we can speak in private." Without waiting for her reply, he turned and pushed through the door into a narrow corridor. The walls here were marked with peeling paint that once depicted vines of orchids. The corridor ended in a small courtyard open to the night sky. Moonlight fell in a silver patch on the tiled floor. A single lantern flickered on a hook, revealing a worn bench near a tall fig tree that sprouted from a hole in the tiles. Daenerys glanced around, ensuring no one else was lurking. She saw only a few scattered crates, a stairway leading up to the building's 2nd floor, and a small door likely leading to an alley. Morito stopped in the courtyard, turning to face her. Jorah stood at her side, one hand near his sword. She could sense his readiness for violence if needed. "All right, my lady," Morito said. "You asked me to come alone, and I have. I told my men to wait inside. Now show me this power you claim to have." Daenerys reached up and drew back her hood. The courtyard's lantern revealed her face, her silvery gold hair. Morito's expression flickered with confusion. Silver hair, he said softly. Are you from the west? A Valyrian descendant. Daenerys did not answer that. Instead, she opened the front of her cloak, allowing Drogon to hop onto her forearm and hiss. The little dragon spread his wings, black scales gleaming in the moonlight. A tiny flame flickered in his throat, illuminating the courtyard with a sudden red glow. Morito jerked back in surprise, his eyes going wide. Gods be good, he muttered. Is that a living dragon? Daenerys let Drogon clamber to her shoulder, where he perched, tail coiled behind her neck. She regarded Morito steadily. You see now what I am. I am Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen, rightful queen of the Seven Kingdoms. And these are my children, my dragons. Proof that the old Valyrian power has returned to the world. She allowed the weight of her lineage to hang in the air. I have been in exile since I was a child, but I mean to reclaim my birthright. I need swords, Captain, and I need ships. The painted spear could be the beginning of my new army, if you are wise enough to see what I offer. He stared, half disbelieving, half enthralled. A Targaryen? I've heard rumors. Mad King's daughter, some say. Others say the line was ended. But the dragons. He reached out as if to touch Drogon, then thought better of it. They're not large, but God's a real dragon. If they grow, they could burn entire armies. He swallowed, a sheen of sweat across his brow. That's power indeed. Daenerys pressed gently. Power enough that if you join me now, you stand to reap rewards beyond mere coin. The painted spear will be remembered as the company that first fought for the mother of dragons. When my dragons are full grown, I will cross the narrow sea. Those who opposed me will kneel or burn, and those who helped me, they will share in my triumph. Her words throbbed with conviction, and Morito seemed to waver, glancing at Jorah, then back at her. And if I say yes, he ventured, if I accept your cause, how do I ensure you can pay my men now, not just in some future war across the sea? She knew that question would arise, and it made her chest tighten. She had enough gold to pay a small retainer, nothing more. She would have to rely on the promise of future spoils. I can give you a modest sum now, enough to keep your men loyal for a time. But if you and I are clever, we can seize greater wealth here in Essos before we ever sail. There are ways, raids on slaver caravans, or small conquests in the disputed lands. You are Sellswords. Your entire livelihood is in taking by force that which others will pay to protect or lose by defeat. I will not remain idle. Together we can gather plunder and, in time, buy ships. He listened, lips drawn thin. It's a gamble, but the truth is, everything in life is a gamble. The painted spear drifts from contract to contract, fighting other Sellswords in the disputed lands. One day you're flush with coin, the next you're starving. At least with you, I see the chance for something bigger. He glanced at Drogon again. And the dragons? How many? 3, Daenerys answered. All young, but growing quickly. Morito let out a nervous laugh. Imagine that. I never thought I'd see a living dragon. I used to hear tales told in taverns. He looked at her, assessing. All right, Daenerys Stormborn. You've piqued my interest enough that I won't dismiss you. Let me propose a test. You say you need swords to gather gold. Lys is flush with wealthy men and women. Some of them are not so kind. A certain magister, Azra Maladaris, is said to keep a private treasury in her estate. She's rumored to have a trove of gemstones from Sithorios, collected through her slaver connections. If one were to relieve her of those gems, that might provide enough wealth to pay a small army for quite some time. Daenerys blinked, taken aback by how readily he proposed burglary, or worse. She glanced at Jorah, who pressed his lips together in disapproval. Are you suggesting we become thieves? She asked quietly. Morito let out a low chuckle. We are Sellswords, my lady, and you speak of forging an army by taking coin from those who would oppose you anyway. This magister is vile, a peddler of flesh who has her hands in the darkest corners of Lys. If you have qualms about seizing ill-gotten wealth from a slaver, perhaps you're not as fierce as you claim. Daenerys's spine stiffened. She had survived the Dothraki Sea, endured Qarth's treachery, and nearly been ensnared by Warlocks. She was no meek child. Marito's taunt struck a chord, reminding her of the cruelty of slavers. Yet it also forced her to confront a moral line. She was no common bandit, but a would-be queen. However, these were not gentle times. In Slaver's Bay, she had once planned, perhaps in some other telling, to free slaves and punish their masters. Now, fate had diverted her path, and here in Lys, the cruelty of the flesh trade was no less. If this magister truly trafficked in slavery, then Daenerys could see some justice in taking from her what had been stolen from others. She let out a measured breath. "I have no love for slavers," she said. "If Azura Maladaris profits from cruelty, then seizing her fortune is not mere theft. It is redress, but the risk is great. Do you have a plan?" Morito spread his hands in a half-shrug, half-sly gesture. "I have a few men who served as bravos and bravos. They can scale walls and slip past guards. If you provide a distraction, or better yet, if your dragons do, my men can sneak into her estate. We might also force our way in at night, kill whoever stands in our path, and take the gemstones by force. But that's a direct approach, and might rouse half the city guard." Daenerys felt an uneasy excitement stir in her stomach. This was the murky path of mercenary warfare, far from the rightful armies that might one day rally under her banner in Westeros. Yet she had few options. "If we do this, I want to be certain the city does not unite against us. Killing a powerful magister might provoke a response." Morito smirked. "You'd be surprised. Half the magisters here hate the other half. If Azura Maladaris falls, some might privately rejoice. The city guard is not a unified force, but a patchwork of bribed watchmen. We have to move quickly, though, and vanish before the rest rally." Daenerys glanced at Jorah, seeking his counsel. He frowned. "This is dangerous, Khaleesi. Brazen theft, a fight in the middle of Lys, could turn half the city against you if it goes poorly. But if the Painted Spear is determined to do it with or without us, perhaps it's better we orchestrate the plan and keep control." She looked back at Morito. "You want me to commit my people to this raid? I want to see if you truly have the stomach for conquest," he replied coolly. "If you join us, or at least help us with your dragons as a distraction, the Painted Spear will consider your contract. If we succeed, you'll have enough coin to hire more blades, and I'll see firsthand that you're not all talk." Daenerys exhaled. She hated that it came down to something so brutal. Yet was it worse than what she had faced in Qarth? There, every kindness had been barbed. And in truth, she was no stranger to the harsh realities of a violent world. "I will consider your plan," she said. "I need at least a day to prepare. Let us meet tomorrow night here at the same hour. Then you will have my answer." Morito nodded, stepping back with a casual salute. "Until then, my lady." He cast one last glance at Drogon, then slipped back inside the House of Orchids. In moments, Daenerys heard his footsteps fade amid the rattle of dice and muted laughter. She and Jorah lingered in the courtyard a moment, hearts beating in the silence. "This feels unclean," she admitted softly, "but I see no straightforward path to forging an army. My father's realm is far, and I cannot simply appear in Westeros with 3 young dragons and hope to triumph." Jorah gave her a grave nod. "The Painted Spear offers a chance to grow your strength, but only through violence and theft. Still, if the target is truly a vile slaver, perhaps you can take some moral comfort in it. That does not ease the risk." She stroked Drogon's scaled neck. "No, yet if we're to gather men by ships, we need gold. Xaro's gifts will not last forever, especially if we hire mercenaries. One day, these dragons will be fearsome enough to burn entire fleets, but that day is not yet. I must take the steps I can." They slipped out of the courtyard through the side door, emerging into a dark alley. The wind carried the scent of brine and jasmine. Daenerys pulled her cloak tighter, lost in thought. They found their guards waiting at discreet intervals, and all of them made their silent way back to the inn. The city's hush weighed heavily on her, as if Lys itself whispered of sin and secrets in the moonlight. When they returned to the inn, Daenerys tucked Drogon away in her room, letting him curl beside Rhaegal and Viserion. Both of the other dragons hissed softly at her absence, pressing their warm bodies close as she settled among them on the floor. She wanted to rest. Her mind was exhausted, but the swirl of possibilities kept her awake. Thievery, raids, mercenary deals. These were not the honorable ways of queens. Yet in the land beyond the sea, her father's throne lay occupied by strangers. The War of the Five Kings raged, or so rumor said, with no place for the rightful Targaryen queen unless she carved it out herself. Was it truly any different to topple a slaver magister for her gems than it was to conquer a city in Slaver's Bay, as she might have done had she gone south instead of west? She tried to push aside her misgivings and drifted into a restless sleep. The next morning dawned hot, and the inn's shutters did little to keep out the rising temperature. Daenerys roused herself and washed with a basin of tepid water, then dressed in a linen tunic and sandals. She needed to decide whether to undertake Marito's plan. She summoned Jorah and her blood riders. Two among them, Jogo and Aggo, were capable scouts. She wanted their insights. They stood around the small table in her cramped chamber, her dragons curled in a corner nibbling at strips of salted fish. Daenerys relayed Marito's proposal. The men listened without interruption. Jogo and Aggo exchanged glances. At last, Jogo spoke. "Stealing from a slaver? That is no shame. The great grass sea has taught us to take what we need from the weak. But this is not the Dothraki way. We do not skulk in the shadows. We ride openly, kill what we must, take the spoils. Is that your wish, Khaleesi?" Daenerys pressed her lips together. "It isn't about glory in battle, Jogo. If we draw too much attention, the entire city might rise against us, or the painted spear will flee. We must be cunning. A direct attack on a wealthy magister's estate could end with city guards at our throats. Yet if we strike unseen and vanish, we might succeed. The painted spear will throw their lot in with me. That is what we need." Jogo shrugged, uncertain. Aggo spat out a curse in Dothraki, but nodded his acceptance. Jorah stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We should learn more about this Magister Azra Maladaris. If we are to steal her wealth, we must be sure she cannot quickly muster a devastating counterattack. She may have private guards or alliances with others in Lys. She might even hire a rival sellsword company to hunt us." Daenerys agreed. "Yes, go quietly through the city. Speak to those who know of her estate. Let us learn its layout, how many guards she keeps, if there are dogs or alarms. We want no surprises. Make certain no warlocks lurk among the crowd. Stay alert for illusions. Piet Pri's reach might extend here, though we have seen no sign of him yet." So they divided tasks. Jogo and Aggo went out to gather information in the city. Jorah remained with Daenerys, pacing the inn's modest common room in tense silence. The hours passed slowly. At midday, she tried to eat a few bites of spiced fish stew, but her stomach churned with worry. She could feel the city's pulse, so different from Qarth's polite tyranny. Here, danger was more immediate, hidden behind perfumed smiles and mercenary bravado. By late afternoon, Jogo returned, sweaty and dusty, smelling of horses and the pungent scents of Lys's streets. He reported that Azra Maladaris owned a walled estate in the southwestern quarter, near the pink marble canal. High walls surrounded her gardens, manned by at least a dozen guards armed with crossbows. She kept a small menagerie, caged tigers from Sithorios, rumored to be fierce. As for Azra herself, Jogo learned that she was a cunning figure with deep pockets, rumored to host lavish feasts for her powerful friends. Many local sellswords had served her at one time or another. Aggo arrived soon after, bearing similar tidings. He added that Azra's estate backed onto the canal. A smaller water gate connected her private dock to the canal itself, though it was likely chained and watched. The estate's main entrance was a pair of heavy bronze doors, overseen by torches at night. Rumor said that the Magister's prized jewels were kept in a vault beneath her mansion. It would require skill or force to access. Daenerys listened gravely. A day ago, she would have balked at planning a nighttime infiltration of a walled estate. Now she felt numb. If seizing these gemstones would let her hire an entire free company, then so be it. She was the blood of the dragon, and dragons do not tremble at the thought of a mere magister. She met Jorah's eyes. Tonight I will give Morito my answer, yes, but let us plan carefully. My men will not scale walls in secrecy. That is the Painted Spear's job. But the dragons can provide a distraction. Perhaps we can circle overhead. Let Drogon breathe flame near the gardens. That might draw the guards away from the vault. Jorah's face was grim. Flying overhead is well enough, but they are still young dragons, Khaleesi. They can fly short distances, but I doubt they can hover above a walled estate for long. And if crossbowmen get a lucky shot, they might wound your children. We cannot risk that. Her heart wrenched at the thought of losing a dragon. She forced herself to keep calm. We will limit our exposure. A brief pass, a burst of flame, just enough to panic the guards. Then I'll pull Drogon away. Regal and Viserion I'll keep out of direct danger. Maybe at a vantage from the rooftops. The Painted Spear will have to do the rest. Jogo grinned, savage delight in his eyes. If the guards run about in fear of dragons, it will be child's play to slip inside. The Dothraki would do it differently, but this way is cunning. Daenerys nodded. She took a breath, as if to steady herself. Very well. Tonight, we go again to the House of Orchids to finalize the plan with Morito. She glanced at Jorah. We must be prepared for betrayal. If at any point it seems Morito intends to double-cross us, we pull away. This is merely a stepping stone, not our final alliance. Night came swiftly. Daenerys donned dark attire, a close-fitting tunic and breeches, boots that allowed quiet movement. A slender dagger hung at her hip. She refused to appear like a helpless noble. The time for illusions of courtly grace was done. She left Regal and Viserion in the inn once more, though she was mindful that soon she'd call on their presence. Drogon perched on her arm as she moved, black wings twitching. With Jorah and a handful of her men, she made her way to the House of Orchids, the city's winding canals reflecting the moonlight in ribbons of silver. At intervals, she spotted brothels advertising themselves with bright lanterns shaped like flowers or hearts. Exotic scents wafted through open windows. More than once, she felt searching gazes from passers-by, but she kept her hood up. When they reached the House of Orchids, Morito was waiting outside, leaning against a pillar with a confident air. Two of his Painted Spear men lurked nearby. He gave Daenerys a crooked smile, nodded to Jorah, then jerked his head toward an adjacent alley. "Shall we plan the night's work in private?" She returned the nod, leading him and a few of her trusted men into a narrower street where the flicker of a single torch lit the walls. Morito set his hands on his hips, cutting to the chase. "So, you're in? We do this tonight." Daenerys nodded. "Yes, my men have scouted the estate. The walls are tall, the guards numerous, but we have a plan. I will bring a dragon overhead, cause a stir. The Painted Spear slips over the walls or through a side entrance while the guards are distracted. Take the gems. No more bloodshed than necessary, but kill those who stand in our way. Then we vanish before the city can muster a response." Morito whistled under his breath. "All right, that's bold. My best climbers can handle it. The rest of the Painted Spear will form a perimeter to stop any guards from flanking us. Then we'll rendezvous at a safe house in the southwestern quarter." He pointed to Jorah. "You'd best keep your men from running at the first arrow. The Painted Spear fights hard, but we don't do it for free. If you want your portion of the gems, you fight for them too." Jorah's jaw tightened. "We will do our part. Do yours." With that agreement, the plan was set. They parted ways, giving each other directions for the rendezvous. Daenerys felt her pulse throb with anticipation and dread. She had orchestrated battles before, in a sense. She had led a Khalasar, faced uncertain foes in Qarth. But tonight would be the first time she truly planned a secret assault on an entrenched estate in a foreign CI. Failure could doom her. Success might buy her a budding army. She and her men returned to the inn, where she prepared her dragons for flight. Regal, the green-scaled, hissed with excitement as she coaxed him onto her forearm. Viserion, the creamy white, stretched his neck and snapped at the air. Drogon, black and red, the boldest, hopped restlessly, as if sensing her tension. She explained the plan as if the dragons could understand, stroking their ridges to calm them. "You must not linger if the archers draw near," she whispered. "Breathe fire, then get away. Stay high in the sky." In truth, the dragons were still young, but they knew her voice, responded to her gestures. She prayed it would be enough. Her men gathered outside, a small group of 10, each armed with a rack or short sword. Jorah carried a shield and wore his old mail. Daenerys wore only light leathers. The Painted Spear had asked that they meet near Azra's estate at the midnight hour. The city felt alive in the darkness, pulses of laughter and torchlight emanating from squares where minstrels played. But beyond those pockets of revelry, the alleys were silent, watchers hidden behind shutters. At last, they reached a vantage point, a broken tower once used as a watchpost near the canal. From the top of its crumbling steps, Daenerys gazed out at Azra Maladaris's estate. The high walls gleamed faintly in the moonlight, pale stone with a row of iron spikes at the top. Torches burned at intervals, each presumably guarded by a sentry. Beyond the wall rose the silhouette of a domed roof, likely the main mansion, and the outlines of tall palm trees in a garden. She saw no sign of Painted Spear men yet, but she trusted they were creeping into position. Behind her, Jorah spoke softly. "We do this swiftly, Khaleesi. If something goes wrong, I'll signal a retreat." Daenerys nodded, her heart pounding. She lifted her arm, beckoning Regal into the night sky. He unfurled his wings, launching with a flutter. Drogon followed, and then Viserion. They circled once above the tower, letting out shrill cries that stirred a few sleeping gulls from the rooftops. Daenerys closed her eyes for an instant, letting the wind carry the dragon's cries. This was madness, perhaps, but the time for caution was past. She gave a low whistle, a specific call she had practiced. The dragons soared toward the estate wall, gliding gracefully in the moonlight. Daenerys watched them, heart in her throat. At first, the guards on the walls did not seem to notice. Then a shout rang out, echoing across the canal. Torches bobbed along the wall. One guard pointed upward at the swirling shapes above. Daenerys saw crossbows lifted. It took every ounce of willpower not to cry out in alarm. If a single bolt struck a dragon. But the Painted Spear must have made their move, because a noise from the far side of the estate drew the guards' attention away from the skies. A clang of steel, a flash of movement among the trees. The guards swiveled, uncertain, and the night air filled with startled yells. Daenerys glimpsed the dragons swooping lower, not too low. She prayed they wouldn't get within range of a lucky shot. Then Drogon spat a sudden burst of flame at a patch of garden. The resulting blaze lit the estate grounds in lurid orange. She heard more shouting, guards cursing. Another flurry of crossbow bolts hissed upward, but the dragons had already wheeled away, climbing above the line of fire. "Now," Daenerys hissed. With Jorah and her men, she hurried from the tower, circling the estate to a side alley. If the guards were distracted, they would likely not notice a small group approaching. Indeed, she found the perimeter poorly guarded, only 2 men near a small gate. Her men fell upon them swiftly, steel flashing in the moonlight. The scuffle was brief and brutal. Jorah slammed one guard with his shield, then cut him down. Another tried to raise an alarm, but a bloodrider's arak opened his throat. Daenerys shivered at the spray of blood. She was in the thick of it now. They slipped through the side gate into a narrow courtyard. Smoke from Drogon's fire drifted overhead, and the distant shouts suggested the Painted Spear were engaged with the estate guards somewhere deeper in the garden. Daenerys's boots crunched on gravel paths. She could smell scorched palm fronds. Beyond the courtyard, she glimpsed a gaping arch that led inside the mansion. She motioned for her men to follow, stepping past a toppled statue. The estate interior beckoned, lit by flickering lamps. If the Painted Spear was to find the vault, they would be in the basement or sublevels. She hoped Morito would not vanish with the jewels before she had a share. Her small group proceeded carefully through the arch into a grand corridor. Marble columns soared, and mosaics covered the floor. Doors branched off in multiple directions. She heard footsteps overhead. A group of panicked servants, perhaps, or more guards. Flames crackled in the distance, setting shadows dancing on the walls. She pressed forward. A figure emerged from a side passage, face twisted in panic. A young guard no older than 16. He froze at the sight of Daenerys and her men. She did not want to kill him, but before she could speak, he lifted his crossbow. Jorah lunged, knocking the weapon aside, and the guard tumbled to the floor. A blood rider pinned him, raising a blade. Daenerys turned away just before she heard the swift, wet sound. Duty demanded success, but her stomach lurched at the necessity of such violence. They continued deeper, following the faint noise of combat echoing through the estate. Eventually they passed a gilded door that hung ajar. Inside was a large reception hall filled with couches and a cluster of fruit-laden tables, presumably for entertaining guests. More bodies lay scattered, some in painted spear cloaks, others in the livery of Azura's household. The fight must have swept through here. The painted spear had moved on, leaving behind the dead. Daenerys's heart hammered. She saw a half-finished painting on the wall, torn by a sword slash. She forced herself to remain focused. The vault must be below. "Look for stairs," she said to Jorah, mindful of keeping her voice low. They pressed on, ignoring the moans of a wounded painted spearman who clutched at a crossbow bolt in his chest. Another corridor brought them to a locked iron door. One of her blood riders bashed at the lock with the hilt of his arak, but it held firm. Jorah tried next with the guard's keys, rummaged from a corpse. At last, one key clicked, and the door creaked open, revealing a dark stair spiraling downward. Torchlight flickered from below, accompanied by distant shouting. Someone was already down there, fighting. Daenerys descended, Jorah right behind her. Her men followed, carrying torches of their own. The walls changed from smooth marble to rough stone, damp with centuries of moisture. As they reached the bottom, a wide cellar opened up. Wine racks lined one wall, and on the other side stood a reinforced wooden door, battered and splintered from repeated blows. The painted spear had evidently tried to break it open. 2 of their men lay dead, crossbow bolts protruding from their necks. Another half-dozen sellswords still battered at the door, ignoring the bodies of 3 estate guards who lay crumpled nearby. "Captain Morito," Daenerys called softly, scanning for him. He emerged from the shadows, panting, a crossbow in his hands. His left arm bled from a shallow wound. When he saw Daenerys, he gave a sharp grin. "So you found your way. Good. We cornered some of the last guards in there. The vault must be through that door. It's reinforced, though. We need to break it down before reinforcements arrive." Daenerys stepped over the body of an estate guard, her heart hammering. "Stand aside," she said, drawing a deep breath. She turned to Jorah, who raised a brow. She unfastened the clasp of her cloak and let Drogon slip from beneath the folds. The black dragon clung to her shoulder, neck craning at the sight of the door. "Dracarys," Daenerys commanded, pointing. Drogon hissed, a line of flame bursting from his jaws, striking the wooden door. The painted spear men scrambled back, startled. The door began to blacken, smoke curling upward, the iron bands glowing faintly as they heated. One crossbowman cheered. Daenerys bit her lip, urging Drogon to sustain the flame. He exhaled again, sparks and embers flying. The air grew acrid with burning wood. After several bursts of flame, the door began to collapse in on itself, the iron bands partially warped. "Again!" she urged, sweat beading her brow. Drogon spat more fire. The door gave way with a sudden crash, revealing a smaller chamber beyond. A few guards who had been cowering inside rushed out in blind panic, faces scorched, half-choked by smoke. The painted spear men cut them down in seconds. Daenerys watched, horror and resolve warring in her heart. She told herself these men had served a slaver, had brandished crossbows. She was no butcher. She was a queen forging her path. Captain Morito pressed ahead, crossbow leveled. "Vaults inside," he shouted. Daenerys moved carefully in his wake. The chamber beyond was larger than she'd expected, with stone walls lined by metal-bound chests and shelves of small steel coffers. At the far end of the room, behind a toppled table, cowered a tall woman in a gold-trimmed gown. Her hair was coiled in braids, and her eyes flashed with fury. She aimed a small crossbow at the intruders. "That must be Azura Maladaris," Morito growled. One of his men leveled a spear to throw, but before he could, the Magister fired her crossbow at the nearest painted spear soldier. It struck him in the throat, and he collapsed, gasping. With a snarl, Morito rushed forward. The Magister fumbled to reload, but not fast enough. Morito's sword found her chest in a single thrust, and she died with a gasp, eyes staring. A hush fell. Daenerys stood in the smoky gloom, ears ringing from the shouts and the roar of Drogon's flame. She saw the painted spear men begin rifling through chests. One threw back the lid of a strongbox. Glittering gemstones spilled out, catching the torchlight with rainbow refractions. Another chest was crammed with gold plates and goblets. Morito gave a triumphant whoop. Daenerys heard her own men let out low whistles. The plunder was vast. She stepped carefully over a shattered bit of door, reaching the Magister's fallen form. The woman's eyes were still open, a trickle of blood on her lips. Daenerys felt no joy in this. By all accounts, Azura had been a slaver, a cruel merchant. Yet to see her lying in a pool of blood was a grim testament to the brutality of this night. Still, Daenerys reminded herself, "For my dragons, for my future, I must be strong." Morito turned to her, panting, eyes alight with greed. "Well done, Targaryen," he said. "We'll be quick. Take what we can carry. Then we must flee before the city guard tries to close off the quarter." Some watchers might have heard the commotion by now. Daenerys nodded. "Take your share," she said, leveling her voice. "But remember our agreement. I claim half. Enough to pay for the Painted Spear's loyalty going forward. Let no one try to cheat me." Morito gave her a sidelong look, then laughed. "Cheat the woman with dragons? I'm no fool. You'll have your share." He signaled his men, who began hastily splitting the gemstones and gold into sacks. Some Painted Spear men grumbled, but a glare from Morito silenced them. In minutes, they had gathered as much wealth as they could carry. Daenerys's men hefted their portion. 3 sacks of gems, 2 sacks of gold, plus a few silver ornaments that might be melted down. Even that portion felt like a king's ransom to Daenerys, though it was only a fraction of the entire vault's contents. Morito's men took roughly an equal share. All told, it was enough to fund a sizable mercenary force for many months, if spent wisely. "Now we run," Morito commanded. The Painted Spear men trooped out, leaving behind scattered corpses and the reek of smoke. Daenerys followed, her men protectively encircling her. Drogon flapped his wings, unsettled by the carnage. She stroked his head, whispering reassurance. They emerged into the main cellar and then up the staircase. The corridor above was still silent, though the flicker of flames from outside suggested parts of the garden still burned. They clambered outside, carefully crossing the courtyard. Daenerys glimpsed a cluster of city guards far off near the main gates, torches bobbing. The Painted Spear peeled away in the opposite direction, splitting into smaller groups so they would not draw attention en masse. Daenerys, Jorah, and their retinue slipped back through the side gate, stepping over the bodies of the 2 guards they had killed earlier. Ago led the way along the canal, scanning for watchers. A handful of Painted Spear men joined them, including Morito, who insisted upon traveling with Daenerys as a show of goodwill. They waded into the shallows near a cluster of moored boats, stealing a small barge left unattended. With quick pushes of the pole, they glided away from the estate, letting the current carry them down the canal into darker, quieter lanes. When at last they reached a safe distance, they made landfall at a crumbling dock behind a deserted warehouse. Everyone disembarked, shaking with adrenaline. Daenerys looked back the way they had come, half expecting to see a hail of crossbow bolts or illusions conjured by warlocks. But the night was still, except for the distant flicker of flames in the direction of Azura's estate. She turned to Morito, shifting the heavy sack of gems slung over her shoulder. "We have spilled blood this night. Let us hope it was worth it." Morito set down his haul, pushing back a strand of sweat-damp hair. "I don't regret it. That woman was scum, feeding on the slave trade. Some might call me scum too, but at least I don't sell children or break families for profit. You have my thanks, Targaryen. This wealth changes everything for me and my men. It also gives you the coin you wanted." Daenerys tightened her hold on Drogon. She could still smell smoke clinging to him. "Will the painted spear fight for me now?" He nodded slowly, eyeing the sacks of treasure. "For now, yes. We have enough gold to buy arms, mount the men, recruit more if needed. We can operate under your banner. But if you aim for a bigger conquest, we'll need even more fighters. Still, this is a start." Daenerys felt a strange swirl of triumph and sorrow. She had made herself into a raider in the night, a thief of a slaver's gem hoard. Yet, with that one savage blow, she had forged a bond with the painted spear. It was a step. "Good. We'll meet tomorrow to formalize the terms of your contract. For now, let us each keep our plunder hidden. We'll lie low. Azura's death will cause a stir. The city guard might search for the culprits." Morito grinned. "They'll search, but Lys is a city of secrets. Many will suspect me, but few will dare challenge a Sellsword company flush with new gold. Still, caution is wise." He hefted his share, gesturing for his men to follow. "My compliments on your dragons. That black one, he's a terror. That is good to see." With that, he departed into the night, his men behind him. Daenerys watched them go, feeling the weight of her own thoughts. Jorah approached quietly. "You've done it. You've secured an alliance. But the cost was high." She nodded, still staring at the dark water lapping against the crumbling dock. "Yes, high indeed. But it's done now. We have gold, Jorah. We have swords. Perhaps soon we can buy a ship or more. We can gather more men. We can begin to be more than wanderers and fugitives." He gave her a look of gentle concern. "You did what you had to, Khaleesi." She pressed her lips together, wrestling with the mix of triumph and guilt. "I wonder how many more times I will say those words. I did what I had to. The journey ahead is still long. But come, let us get these jewels back to the inn if we can do so without being seen. Tomorrow we decide how best to expand. Tonight we rest." They made their cautious way through winding back streets. Twice, they hid in shadows as patrols of watchmen passed, drawn by rumors of chaos in the southwestern quarter. At last, they reached the Modest Inn near the harbor. Daenerys was relieved to find its doors barred and the building quiet. One of her sentries let them in, offering a quick, worried glance at the sacks of loot. She assured him all was well, then trudged upstairs, exhausted. In her small chamber, she set down the spoils on the wooden table, ignoring the ache in her arms from carrying the weight. The dragons paced around her ankles, sensing her tension. She knelt, pressing her palm to the floor, exhaling. Jorah stood nearby, watchful, unwilling to leave her alone in these uncertain hours. She gave him a weary smile. "I'm fine, Ser Jorah. Just tired." He bowed his head. "I'll stand guard outside your door. Sleep if you can. We'll talk at sunrise about the next steps." She nodded, and he withdrew, quietly closing the door. Daenerys cast her eyes over the sacks, imagining the wealth within. Gems enough to purchase a small fleet, if cunningly bargained. And that was only half the treasure they had stolen. For a moment, she let herself picture an army of freed men and women, spurred by the sight of dragons, crossing the seas to reclaim her birthright. She let the fantasy soothe her battered spirit. The images flickered, and Piet Pre's mocking face intruded on her thoughts. He had not appeared. No illusions had risen to plague her in the midst of this night's violence. Perhaps she had outrun him at last, or perhaps not. She could still feel the Warlock's shadow on her destiny. Yet for now, she had won a minor victory in Lys, bending events to her will. If the Warlocks lurked, let them lurk in the shadows. The blood of the dragon would not be cowed by threats of magic. She was forging her future, step by step with steel and flame. Slowly, her breathing steadied. She settled onto her thin mattress, letting the dragons curl around her legs. Drogon gave a small, comforting rumble. She stroked his scales, recalling how he had burned through the estate door with ease. One day, if she succeeded, these dragons would be massive and unstoppable. One day, she would make the world remember the power of House Targaryen. Until then, she was merely a young queen with a handful of loyal knights, cunning sellswords, and a stolen trove of jewels. It was enough to begin. Sleep crept over her, dragging her down into half-formed dreams of a throne made of swords. She saw her hand reach out to touch the cold metal, only to find it shimmering like a mirage. Then she saw Qarth's warlocks, laughing at her from behind pillars of smoke. A swirl of illusions threatened to ensnare her, but a sudden roar of dragonfire shattered the vision, leaving only a burning hall. She heard Jorah's voice somewhere at the edge of consciousness, urging her to wake. When her eyes fluttered open, dawn light was seeping through the shutters. She pushed herself upright, dragging a hand through her tangled hair. The stolen gems still glinted on the table, half spilled from a torn sack. Rhaegal dozed in a patch of sunlight, and Viserion was curled around Daenerys's boots. Drogon perched near the shutters, gazing out at the city as if enthralled by its movements. Daenerys rose, wincing at stiff muscles, and went to open the shutters a crack. The harbor spread out before her, the water gleaming under the new sun. Lists stretched in labyrinthine brilliance, pink and white STO, canals reflecting the sky, and a swirl of unfamiliar voices. She saw a scattering of city guard patrolling the piers, likely investigating rumors of last night's raid. For the moment, no one paid attention to the unremarkable inn. Daenerys exhaled, relief and tension mingling. They had succeeded, but her instincts warned that the city might soon bristle with rumors of the Dragon Queen, who had come in the night to kill a magister. She dressed and summoned Jorah. Together, they counted their haul. The gems alone were enough to buy a small ship outright, or to feed an entire mercenary company for a year. The gold plate could be melted down, turned into coin for easier trade. Daenerys felt a flutter of possibility. She could pay the Painted Spear to recruit more fighters, or perhaps hire a second free company. Or she might put coin toward building or purchasing ships outright. The question, though, was where to go. West to Westeros, or somewhere else first to gather even more strength. When the Painted Spear arrived at midday, Morito and 3 of his men, all in civilian attire to avoid suspicion, they found Daenerys and Jorah waiting in the inn's cramped common room. Daenerys had kept the dragons upstairs. She did not wish to cause a stir among the other patrons, who might wander in at any moment. "Good day," Morito said quietly, taking a seat at a corner table. Daenerys and Jorah joined him. The inn's keep eyed them from afar, but did not approach, perhaps sensing they wished privacy. Morito folded his hands on the table. "I trust you're satisfied with your share of the spoils?" "Very," Daenerys replied. "It will finance my next steps. I hope your men are likewise content." He smirked. "Content enough. They believe you have potential to lead us to bigger scores, if your dragons keep proving useful." He fiddled with a chipped cup, gaze shifting to Jorah. "So what is your next move, Targaryen Queen? Should we gather ships to sail west tomorrow?" She sensed the mocking note in his voice, though faint. The Painted Spear might be hired, but not yet fully devoted to her cause. Mercenaries seldom gave unthinking loyalty. She would have to show them that following her was more profitable than any rival path. "We cannot sail to Westeros just yet," Daenerys said calmly. "My dragons are still growing, and I have only a handful of men. The Painted Spear, though useful, numbers what? 50, counting your new recruits." 52, Morito corrected. "And half of those are as green as the summer grass." Daenerys inclined her head. "We need more swords if we hope to challenge any Westerosi warlord. The War of the Five Kings continues, so rumor says. I might ally with one or none, but if I arrive with too few men, I'll be crushed in a day. I need a true army. Perhaps we can find it here in Essos. I know the Golden Company has thousands of seasoned fighters, but we lack the coin to buy their contract all at once. Then there are the Second Sons, the Stormcrows, countless smaller bands. Or we might find an ally among the Magisters of Volantis or Pentos if they see advantage in my cause. Morito drummed his fingers. True. Or we could press our advantage here in Lys. With Azura's estate in disarray, some of the lesser powers might be vulnerable. You could carve out a base of power. Daenerys did not like the idea of lingering too long. If we start conquering slices of Lys, the entire city might rise against us. Even with dragons, we can't win a protracted siege in the heart of their domain. I'd rather not spend half a year fighting street by street. My ultimate goal lies across the sea. So we leave soon? Jorah asked, half hopeful. He understood how Westeros was fracturing under the weight of war. Daenerys shook her head. Not too soon. We must consider sailing to another free city, forging alliances on the way, or perhaps traveling overland to the disputed lands. The Painted Spear might do well in raiding other mercenaries or forging alliances with them, building a larger army that answers to me. She let out a short breath. We risk drawing the attention of more powerful adversaries, but we cannot remain small. Morito looked thoughtful. The disputed lands have been in near-constant war among the free cities for generations. Sellsword companies fight over every scrap of farmland. If you arrive with dragons, you might subdue or recruit the lesser companies. Many of them are poorly paid. Still, the Golden Company or other heavyweights might object. And it leaves us the question of ships, Jorah noted. We eventually need to cross the narrow sea. That means a fleet or enough coin to hire one. Buying ships in bulk is expensive. Seizing them by force is no simpler. Daenerys listened, trying to weigh her options. Perhaps she could sail to Pentos, approach Illyrio Mopatis, the same Magister who had once sheltered her brother and her as children. He had, after all, arranged her marriage to Khal Drogo in the hope of forging an alliance. In another life, she might have returned to him after Qarth. But in this turning of fate, she had gone to Lys instead. Did Illyrio remain a potential ally, or would he prove treacherous? She recalled him as cunning, guided by self-interest. Still, Pentos was closer to Westeros than Lys, and if he supported her, she might find it easier to muster men. She had the dragons now, a stronger bargaining chip than she'd ever had as a frightened girl. She brushed the thought aside for the moment. She needed to speak with Morito privately and gauge his reaction. For now, she said, we will not take immediate action. Let the city settle after Azura's death. We will keep the Painted Spear under contract for the next month, paying daily wages. In that time, I want you to recruit more men if possible. No sense in revealing me as your ultimate patron. Let them think you came into wealth by some lesser means. If by the end of a month you've grown your ranks, we'll decide if we continue in Lys or move on. Morito nodded slowly. A month's wage is a good start. I can bring you a roster of new fighters. If any prove untrustworthy, I'll cast them out. But recruiting quickly has its dangers. We might pick up brigands or cutthroats. Daenerys gave a small, tight smile. We are forging an army of sellswords, Captain. Cutthroats come with the territory. All that matters is that they follow orders. She rose, signaling that the meeting was done. See that your men stay discreet. Do not speak of my dragons or my name to those who do not need to know. We do not want the Warlocks or any other foe on our trail. Agreed, Morito said, pushing up from the table. I'll be in touch soon. He and his men departed, leaving Daenerys and Jorah in the hush of the common room. She was keenly aware of the innkeeper's furtive glances. The woman likely suspected something odd about Daenerys, but gold would buy silence, at least for a time. Jorah gave Daenerys a measured look. You speak with such authority. You sound like a queen. She let out a wry breath. Sometimes it feels like a performance, but I must command if I am to be queen in truth. No one else will guide me. I lost my brother's illusions of grandeur, I lost the Warlocks' illusions in Qarth before they could show me my future. Now I create my own path. Are you still with me, Ser Jorah? Even if it leads to more nights like last." He met her gaze steadily. "Always, Khaleesi. I made my choice long ago. My sword is yours." Her chest tightened with gratitude. "Thank you." She laid a gentle hand on his arm, then withdrew to climb the stairs. She needed a moment with her dragons to reassure herself that they were truly unhurt from their flight last night. Up in her chamber, she found Drogon perched on the windowsill, sunning himself. Rhaegal and Viserion flitted about, chasing dust motes. Their wings had grown stronger each day, and she could see the promise of power within them. She had lost the Warlock's prophecies, but in exchange, she had kept her life, and these dragons were forging their own destinies with her. She stroked Drogon's neck, remembering how his flames had shattered that iron-banded door. One day, he would be large enough to shatter castle gates. She thought of the Red Keep in King's Landing, the seat of her ancestors, the seat of the usurpers. She imagined black wings shadowing the ramparts, flame licking across the battlements. She shivered, uncertain if the thrill that coursed through her was excitement or fear. Time passed in a restless rhythm. Over the next few days, news spread that Magister Azra Maladaris had been slain, her estate ravaged by unknown raiders. Rumors claimed dragons were involved, that fiery beasts had descended upon her gardens. But in the world of Lys, rumor mixed with exaggeration. Some believed the Painted Spear was behind it, but no one dared confront them openly. Azra had been widely hated, or at least regarded with envy by rival magisters. The city guard might have posted a bounty, but in Lys, bounties were seldom enforced unless a powerful faction demanded it. Daenerys heard whispers that some new consortium of slavers was attempting to claim Azra's property, but no one seemed eager to avenge her. Life moved on. True to his word, Morito began recruiting men. He drew them from the taverns and dice dens, from lesser Sellsword crews, and from those left unemployed by the city's shifting fortunes. He kept his methods discreet enough that Daenerys' name and dragons remained hidden. Soon the Painted Spear swelled to almost 70 men. At the same time, Daenerys used her share of the loot to hire craftsmen who could fashion better saddles, harnesses, and gear for her dragons. She instructed them to keep silent about the nature of their work. She hinted these were exotic falcons from Ashai that required special equipment. Gold silenced most questions. Within a fortnight, Daenerys felt the stirrings of a small power base. Her men, now mingled with Morito's, began training together in a warehouse near the harbor, closed to prying eyes with watchers posted outside. Jorah oversaw drills, teaching them discipline they otherwise lacked. Daenerys occasionally attended these sessions, though she kept her dragons mostly out of sight. The Painted Spear men had glimpsed Drogon's fire once already. That was enough to keep them awed. She did not want them to grow complacent or treat her children as curiosities. Yet with each passing day, she sensed that she could not remain in Lys indefinitely. The city was full of temptation and danger. She heard talk of wealthy slave traders who might conspire to kill or capture a woman rumored to have dragons. The memory of Piet Pri haunted her, though no warlocks had surfaced. She suspected they might appear when she least expected. She wanted to be gone before that day came. Late one afternoon, she asked Jorah to join her atop the old watchtower near the harbor, the same place they had once used to survey Azra's estate. The crumbling steps led to a broken parapet with a decent view of the sea. Rhaegal perched on her left shoulder, Drogon and Viserion circling overhead in slow arcs, still small enough that their flapping wings did not drown out all sound. Jorah stood beside her, leaning on the parapet. "What do you see out there, Khaleesi?" he asked softly, scanning the horizon. She gazed at the sparkling sea. "I see the path to Westeros, or, if we choose, to other free cities. Pentos, Myr, Tyrosh, Volantis, each might hold an alliance or a pitfall. I wonder if we should make for Pentos, see if Illyrio Mopatis remains open to supporting me. He was once my brother's patron, after all. Perhaps my dragons would sway him." Jorah considered. Illyrio is a man of appetites, not known for unwavering loyalty. But he does value profit, and your dragons are a great wonder. He might well be convinced to lend you ships or gold in exchange for future concessions. Daenerys tapped the parapet with her fingertips. And what of the disputed lands? Morito suggests we go there to gather more sellswords. If I march from city to city, forging alliances or subduing lesser companies, I could build an army large enough to be taken seriously in Westeros. True, Jorah allowed, but that might take a year or more. Meanwhile, the Seven Kingdoms churn. Another king might emerge victorious, leaving no easy foothold for your claim. She lifted her face to the salt breeze. I fear if I delay too long, my claim will be forgotten. Yet if I rush there now, I'll be crushed. My father's old supporters may not be enough, and I have no illusions that the small folk will rise spontaneously in my name. They need hope, but also proof of might. Jorah was silent a long moment. Khaleesi, I cannot decide for you. My counsel is to gather as much strength as you can, but do not let the dream of a perfect invasion blind you to opportunity. You already have near 100 fighters between your men and the Painted Spear. With gold, that can soon be doubled. That might be enough to carve a foothold somewhere, or secure alliances with certain lords in Westeros, if your dragons do some of the persuading. She nodded, letting the words sink in. The sky above Lys was streaked with clouds tinted by the late afternoon sun, and the harbor below shimmered with golden light. Drogon swooped overhead, letting out a high call. She watched him, feeling a pang of longing for a simpler path, for the guidance she had lost when she escaped the house of the Undying too soon. But perhaps it was better this way. She had no illusions shaped by prophecy, only her own determination. Pentos, then? She said softly, as if to the wind. We could charter a few ships, transport the Painted Spear across the sea. Illyrio may greet us with open arms if he believes we bring dragons and potential conquest. Jorah nodded. It's a start, and if Illyrio proves false, we'll move on. At least Pentos is closer to Westeros, giving us more direct knowledge of the war. We can plan accordingly. Daenerys felt a tremor of resolution. Yes, I will speak to Morito. We'll gather ships within the week, quietly. I want no fanfare, no reason for the city guard to stop us. Then we sail. Jorah inclined his head. As you say, Khaleesi, I'll make the preparations. They descended from the tower as dusk settled, the dragons fluttering after them. Daenerys' mind churned with details, arranging passage for men and horses, ensuring the Painted Spear remained loyal through the journey, deciding how best to approach Illyrio. But she felt renewed purpose. She would not let Lys trap her in endless petty fights. Her destiny, her birthright, lay across the narrow sea, and she inched closer to it every day. That night, she summoned Morito to the inn's larger chamber. He arrived with 2 lieutenants, both tough-faced sellswords. Daenerys laid out her proposition. They would quietly purchase or hire ships sufficient to carry them all to Pentos, a city across the sea. There, she would seek an alliance with a magister she once knew. The Painted Spear would receive regular pay en route, and if the magister proved a dead end, they would continue on to other potential allies. In time, they might even ferry themselves to Westeros. Throughout it all, Daenerys promised she would feed and pay them so long as they remained loyal. Morito listened, one brow raised. You mean to uproot us from Lys? He said, leaning back. We've just gained a foothold here. We have gold, a place to recruit. Are you certain we want to leave so soon? Daenerys nodded. I have no interest in establishing a petty fiefdom in Lys. My eyes look west, to the throne that is mine by right. I must move where I can gather true allies, not lurk in a city that might turn against me at any moment. He stroked his chin, then shrugged. As you will. I can't deny your dragons are a powerful bargaining chip, and your gold is good. My men will follow if the pay continues. If you can hire or buy enough ships, I won't object to crossing the sea. They discussed details. How many ships would be needed, how many men the Painted Spear counted, how to avoid city taxes and prying eyes. They settled on hiring a small fleet of 3 merchant cogs through a local shipping agent who was rumored to have no love for Lysene customs. Daenerys would pay him a hefty premium for silence. Slowly, the plan took shape. Over the following week, Daenerys' retinue and the Painted Spear made discreet preparations. Weapon caches were gathered, horses sold or bartered if they could not be easily transported. Daenerys parted with more gems to ensure the shipping agent's loyalty. The tension within the city grew as rumors circulated of a foreign queen with dragons. Daenerys prayed that they could slip away before the city's powers decided to act against her. On the eve of their departure, she stood by the harbor under cover of darkness, watching the ships sway at anchor. The shipping agent, a squat man with gold-rimmed teeth, assured her that the cogs were provisioned for a swift crossing. Marito's men began filing aboard, carrying crates of arms and sacks of rations. Daenerys kept her dragons leashed for the moment, though they fussed at the cords. She would not see them caged below decks. Instead, she'd let them stay near her, perched wherever they found space. If the weather was fair, they could fly short distances around the ships. Jorah lingered near the gangplank, scanning the darkness for any sign of the city guard. A handful of watchers in worn leather jerkins lounged by the harbor's entrance, but a payment of gold had already assured their indifference for this night. Daenerys was taking no chances, though. She saw a few Painted Spear archers posted discreetly, ready to raise alarm at the slightest trouble. At last, Morito approached her, his mood somewhere between excitement and wariness. "We've nearly boarded. Another half hour and we can slip out with the tide. After that, there's no turning back." Daenerys exhaled, glancing at the city behind them. Lys had been a strange chapter in her journey, a place of stolen riches and half-hidden alliances, of smoke and blood in the night. She thought of Azura's estate in flames, of the bodies littering the corridors, and a chill ran through her. She was no longer the innocent girl who had once stood shyly in Illyrio's halls. She had grown into a woman who would steal from slavers and hire mercenaries, whatever it took to reclaim what was hers. She would not regret it, though a small part of her ached at each step into darkness. Turning to Morito, she said, "I will not look back. Let us go. The Painted Spear has my thanks for coming this far. May we find greater fortunes ahead." He gave a crooked grin. "I'll hold you to that, Targaryen queen. Dragon's queen, I should say." His gaze flicked to Drogon, who perched on a post, staring unblinkingly at the cell's word captain. "If your lizards keep breathing fire on your enemies, we'll do well." Daenerys only nodded. She waved Jorah closer. "Let us board. I want to be out at sea before dawn. The city might discover our departure if we linger." So they boarded. Daenerys climbed the plank behind Jorah, her dragons fluttering and screeching softly. The Painted Spear men secured their gear. Sailors readied lines and sails. In the harbor's darkness, 3 merchant cogs slipped away from the piers, drifting into the open water. Daenerys stood on the deck, gripping the rail, her heart pounding as Lys retreated behind them. The faint glow of city lanterns and canal lights dwindled, the silhouettes of towers dissolving into the night. She felt a swirl of relief, regret, and anticipation. Once again, she was leaving a city where she had tested her will. Once again, she sailed for a new horizon. But this time, she was stronger, with gold to spare, over 70 sellswords under her command, and 3 growing dragons at her side. She gazed at the starlit sky, remembering that her path might have been different had she wandered deeper into the House of the Undying. She might have gleaned cryptic prophecies there. Yet all that truly mattered now was the fire inside her, the unyielding vow that she would someday cross the narrow sea to claim the Iron Throne. Drogon spread his wings, letting the night wind ruffle his scales. Rhaegal and Viserion lifted their heads, curious about the gentle rocking of the ship. Daenerys reached out to stroke them, feeling the steady thrum of life beneath their scales. If the Warlocks still hunted her, let them come. She would face them. If slavers or magisters or kings tried to stand in her way, she had sellswords and, more importantly, dragons. Her course was set. As the ships found open water, Daenerys watched Lys disappear below the horizon, the flickers of its harbor fires fading into black. Jorah stood beside her, silent. She took comfort in his stalwart presence, the only constant across all her trials. The painted spear bustled about, some cursing seasickness, others laughing at their good fortune. Overhead, the stars shone bright and cold. She closed her eyes and let the sea breeze wash over her face, imagining the future she would forge. Pentos lay ahead, Illyrio's halls and the stepping stone to Westeros. Her father's throne might still be half a world away, contested by men who called themselves kings. But each day, her dragons grew stronger, her legend spread, and the power of House Targaryen regained its spark. She whispered a silent promise to herself, that she would not falter, that she would see this journey through fire and blood, illusions be damned. She was Daenerys Stormborn, mother of dragons, and her path to power would be written in the flames she carried with her across the sea. So the ships pressed on, sails straining under the night wind, carrying the Dragon Queen into new unknowns. And though she had not seen the visions once offered by the Warlocks, she carried a fiercer knowledge in her heart, that destiny was not bestowed but seized, shaped by one's own hand on the hilt of fate's sword. If she burned bright enough, the world itself would take notice, and no illusions or enemies could stand against the fire she bore. The night stars bore silent witness as Daenerys Targaryen sailed onward, forging a future that no prophecy could have foreseen.